The wind that night carried the smell of coming snow, the kind that settles into your bones before a single flake falls. Inside Murphy's saloon, the air was thick with tobacco smoke, whiskey fumes, and the particular sourness of men who'd spent too long in their own company. It was Friday, which meant the place was packed. Miners fresh from the claim, ranch hands with a week's pay burning holes in their pockets, drifters looking for warmth and trouble in equal measure. Aspen Bend wasn't much of a town. 24 buildings hunched against the Wyoming wind, most of them leaning like drunks propping each other up. But Murphy's was the heart of it, such as it was. The place where deals got made, lies got told, and occasionally, very occasionally, something resembling truth emerged from all that whiskey-soaked conversation. Tom Murphy himself stood behind the bar, a man whose face had settled into permanent skepticism. He'd seen everything twice and believed half of nothing. Tonight, he was pouring drinks with the efficiency of someone who'd long ago stopped caring what people did with them, as long as they paid first. 3 more over here, Tom. Deal me in on the next hand.
I'm telling you, that vein runs deeper than Calloway thinks. The noise was a living thing, rising and falling like breath.
That's when the door opened. Not the usual opening, the casual push, the stumble, the swagger. This was different. The door hit the wall hard enough to rattle the bottles behind the bar, and the blast of cold air that came with it made the nearest lamp flames dance sideways. The man who stood there looked wrong for the setting. Not dangerous wrong, though there was that too, but displaced wrong. Like someone had reached into the deep mountains and dragged him down against his will. His beard was untrimmed, shot through with ice crystals that hadn't melted yet. His coat was made from poorly tanned hide that still had fur on it in patches. His boots were wrapped with rawhide laces, repaired so many times they were more repair than original boot. But it was his eyes that stopped the conversation. They swept the room with an animal's caution, taking in exits and threats before anything else. This wasn't a man uncomfortable in crowds. It was a man who'd forgotten how they worked. He stood there for 3, 4, 5 seconds, long enough for the nearest conversations to die, long enough for heads to turn, long enough for Tom Murphy to set down his bottle and straighten up behind the bar. Help you? Tom's voice carried that particular Wyoming flatness, the tone that could mean welcome or warning depending on what came next. The stranger didn't move further inside. He stood in the doorway like he expected to bolt at any second, cold wind still pouring around him, making the people at the nearest tables shift and grumble. I need to speak to Judge Farrow. His voice was rough, underused. The words came out careful, like he was translating from a language he'd stopped thinking in. Judge ain't here. This from Pete Hancock, one of the regulars, already half drunk and feeling talkative. He's at the boarding house, playing cards with Reverend Mitchell and Doc Hayes like he does every Friday. The stranger absorbed this. Then I need to speak to him there. Boarding house don't allow visitors after dark. Pete was enjoying himself now, the way drunks do when they've got someone to poke at. Mrs. Abernathy's rules strict about it. Something crossed the stranger's face, not anger exactly, but a kind of worn-down frustration, like a man who'd prepared for one problem and found a different one instead. Then I'll wait, he said. Could be a long wait. Pete grinned. Judge likes his cards. Might play until midnight. I'll wait. The stranger finally stepped inside, letting the door close behind him. He didn't approach the bar or look for a table. He just found an empty spot against the wall near the cold stove in the corner and settled there. Standing, not sitting, watching. The saloon took its time getting back to normal volume. Conversations resumed, but quieter now, with more glances toward the corner. The man might as well have been a wolf that wandered in and decided to stay. You know him? Someone muttered to Tom. Tom shook his head. Never seen him. Think he's trouble? Don't know, but he ain't right. An hour passed. The stranger didn't move, didn't order a drink, didn't even shift his weight much. He just stood there, patient as stone, while the saloon flowed around him. Some of the men started making guesses, voices loud enough to carry. Probably killed someone. Come to turn himself in. Nah, he'd have brought the body if it was that. Maybe he's one of them mountain men. Heard there's still a few up in the high country, living like savages. Living like what now? The stranger's voice cut through the speculation. Not loud, but it carried. Say that again? The man who'd said it, a ranch hand named Cooper,
flushed red. Didn't mean nothing by it. Yes, you did. The stranger didn't move from his spot. But I didn't come here to fight, so we'll let it pass. The way he said it, not a threat, just a statement of decision, made Cooper shut his mouth and turn back to his drink. There was something in the stranger's tone that suggested fighting was a thing he knew too much about, not too little. Another half hour. The crowd was starting to thin, early departures heading home before the cold got worse. The stranger remained. Then the door opened again, and Judge Farrow walked in with Doc Hayes and Reverend Mitchell. All three of them stopped when they saw the room's attention focused on the corner. Judge Farrow was in his 60s, white-haired and sharp-eyed, a man who'd presided over this territory back when it was even rougher than it was now. He'd sentenced rustlers and claim jumpers, and once, famously, a man who'd shot his own brother over a disputed fence line. He had the bearing of someone who'd heard every excuse and believed almost none of them. "Evening, Tom." The judge's eyes never left the stranger. "We expecting trouble?" "Don't think so, Judge. That fella's been waiting for you. Been here near 2 hours, hasn't said 10 words to anyone." Judge Farrow studied the stranger for a long moment. "You have business with me?" "I do." "Official business?" "Yes, sir." The judge glanced at his companions, then back. "All right. We can speak in the back room. Tom, we need it to be public," the stranger interrupted. "What I'm here for, it needs witnesses, legal ones." Now the judge's eyebrows went up. The whole saloon had gone quiet again, everyone sensing something about to happen. "That's an unusual request. It's an unusual situation." Judge Farrow considered this. Then he shrugged. "All right, public it is. Say your piece." The stranger pushed away from the wall. He didn't come far into the room, just far enough that everyone could see and hear him clearly. He stood there like a man about to jump off something high, gathering himself. "My name is Elias Rowan," he said. "I live in a cabin 16 miles north of here, up past Copper Ridge. I've been there 11 years. He paused, as if expecting questions, but none came. Everyone was listening now. 3 weeks ago, I found 2 children on the trail near my property, a boy and a girl. Their parents' wagon had broken an axle trying to ford the creek. Both parents drowned. The children survived." A murmur went through the crowd. Doc Hayes leaned forward. "How old?" "Boys 8, girls 5. "And you took them in," Judge Farrow said. It wasn't a question. "Had to. Would have frozen otherwise." "Noble of you," the judge said, though his tone suggested he was waiting for the other boot to drop. "So what brings you here? Need help with their care? We can arrange—" "I need a wife," Elias said flatly. "By sunrise." The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then someone laughed. Just one person at first, but it spread like fire in dry grass. Within moments, half the saloon was laughing. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind that erupts when something so absurd gets said with such seriousness that people can't help themselves. Elias stood there and took it. His face didn't change. He didn't get angry or embarrassed. He just waited, like a man used to waiting, until the laughter started to die down on its own. "You're serious," Judge Farrow said, and there was no laughter in his voice, just careful assessment. "Yes, sir." "And why, exactly, do you need a wife by sunrise?" "Because the territorial law says a single man can't be guardian to orphaned children without demonstrating proper household arrangements. I looked it up when I came through here last week. Talked to the clerk at the land office. He showed me the statute." The laughter had stopped completely now. Pete Hancock, who'd been grinning, wasn't anymore. "The law says," Elias continued, his voice steady, measured, like he'd practiced this, "that orphaned children must either be placed with married relatives, or if no such relatives exist, they must be surrendered to territorial custody for placement. The nearest territorial orphanage is in Cheyenne, 600 miles east." "Jesus," someone muttered. "I sent a letter 3 weeks ago explaining the situation, asked for an extension, time to make proper arrangements. The reply came yesterday." Elias pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, the motion stiff, like his fingers were still half frozen. "Territorial agent arrives day after tomorrow to collect the children, unless I can demonstrate by sunrise tomorrow that I have a suitable household." Judge Farrow held out his hand. Elias crossed the room,
his first real movement into the space, and handed over the letter. The judge read it slowly, his expression darkening. "They're not even giving you until the agent arrives," he said quietly. "This says you have to demonstrate suitability by the time they receive confirmation. Which means, by sunrise," Elias finished, "when the morning stage leaves. I have to send word back with the driver that I've met the requirements. Otherwise, the agent takes the children when he arrives." The judge folded the letter carefully. "This is a hard piece of law. It's the law that exists."
"It is." Judge Farrow looked up, his eyes sharp. "But let me be clear about what you're asking. You want to marry someone, a stranger, presumably, since you've been living alone on a mountain for 11 years, purely to satisfy a legal requirement. You understand that's what this is? A legal marriage, with all that entails?" "I understand." "And you expect to find someone willing to do this? Tonight? A woman who'll marry a man she doesn't know to help raise children she's never met?" "I don't know if I expect it," Elias said, "but I have to try." More silence. This was different from before. The laughter was gone completely now, replaced by something heavier. These were hard people, in a hard place, but there were lines. Taking children from the only person they had left, sending them 600 miles to an institution. That sat wrong. "Even if someone agreed," Doc Hayes spoke up, "marriage requires a license, a waiting period." "Not in emergency circumstances," Judge Farrow interrupted, "and not with my authority. If both parties consent, if there's documented cause, I can perform an immediate ceremony." He looked at Elias. "But that's the least of your problems, son. Your problem is finding someone willing." "I know. Do you?" The judge's voice gentled slightly. "Because what you're asking, it's not small. You're asking someone to leave their life, whatever it is, and come up to a remote cabin to help raise 2 traumatized children with a man they don't know. That's asking for a kind of faith most people don't have." "I know," Elias repeated. His jaw tightened. "But they're good children. The boy, his name's Noah. He's quiet, works hard, doesn't complain. The girl, Eliza, she barely talks right now, but before all this happened, I think she was bright, quick. I can see it in her eyes when she does speak." He stopped, swallowed. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher. "I'm not asking someone to love them. I'm not even asking someone to love me. I'm just asking someone to help me keep them safe, to give them a chance. Because if they go to that orphanage—" He trailed off. "What?" Judge Farrow prompted. "I've heard things about those places. How children get lost in them. How they stop being children and just become numbers. Names in a register." Elias looked around the room, meeting eyes for the first time. "These 2 have already lost everything. I can't let them lose themselves too." The saloon had never been this quiet. Even the card players had stopped, hands frozen mid-deal. Tom Murphy cleared his throat. "They're orphans. You said their parents died. Do they have any other family?" "Not that I've found. The mother kept a Bible with family names, but everyone listed is back east, places like Pennsylvania and Virginia. Even if I could reach them, by the time they responded, it'd be too late." "So you've tried other options," the judge said. "Everyone I could think of. This is the last one." Reverend Mitchell had been quiet until now. A small man with kind eyes who usually spoke in platitudes. But when he spoke, there was something genuine in it. "What you're proposing, it's not a marriage in the eyes of faith. You understand that? It would be a legal arrangement, nothing more." "I understand. But you'd be bound by it, both of you, unless the law changed or you went through proper dissolution proceedings." "I understand that too," the Reverend nodded slowly. "Then I suppose the question is whether anyone here feels called to such a thing." All eyes turned to the women in the room. There weren't many, 2 saloon girls near the bar looking uncomfortable with the sudden attention, and a handful of other women scattered among the tables, wives of miners and ranch hands mostly, out for a rare Friday evening. None of them moved. Elias had known this moment would come, had steeled himself for it, but standing there under those stares, watching woman after woman look away, it hit him harder than expected. Not for himself, he was used to rejection, to being apart, but for Noah and Eliza, back at the cabin, trusting that he'd find some way to fix this. "There's got to be someone," Pete Hancock said, drunk enough to keep talking when others wouldn't. "Hell, what about you, Sarah? You're always saying you wish you had young ones to care for." Sarah Colton, a woman in her 40s sitting with her husband, flushed red. That's different, Pete, and you know it. How's it different? Because she looked at Elias, then away. Because I have a life here, a home, a husband. She didn't say the rest, but it hung there anyway. Because I'm not desperate enough to run off with a stranger. What about Widow Morrison? Someone else suggested. She's alone now, might welcome. Widow Morrison is 60 years old and has rheumatism so bad she can barely walk, another voice cut in. What's she going to do on a mountain? The suggestions kept coming, each one dying faster than the last. The saloon girls were too young, too flighty. The married women were married. The few single women were either too old, too sick, or too settled in their own situations. Elias listened to it all without expression, but something inside him was folding in on itself. He'd known it was a long shot. He'd known. But hearing it laid out like this, hearing all the reasons why no one would choose this, choose him, it made the impossibility concrete. Perhaps, Judge Farrow said gently, you should consider other arrangements. I could write to the territorial office, request a delay. They already denied the delay. I could try again. With my authority, it won't matter. Elias's voice was flat now, emptied out. The law is clear. They made it clear. Either I meet the requirement or the children go. Then maybe, the judge hesitated. Maybe that's what needs to happen. The orphanage isn't ideal, but it's not a death sentence. Children survive them. Some even thrive. No. The word came out harder than Elias intended. Several people drew back slightly. No, he repeated, softer, but no less firm. I made them a promise. When I buried their parents, when I told them they were safe, that was a promise. I don't break promises. Son, sometimes circumstances— I don't break promises, Elias said again. His hands were clenched at his sides now, the only outward sign of what was happening inside him. I've lived alone for 11 years because I broke a promise once before and it cost someone everything. I won't do it again. Not to them. The raw honesty in his voice made the whole room shift uncomfortably. This wasn't calculation or strategy. This was something stripped bare. Judge Farrow studied him for a long moment. What promise did you break before? Elias's jaw worked. Doesn't matter now. I think it does. It's not— Elias stopped, breathed. It's not relevant to this. Maybe not legally, but if you're asking someone to trust you with their life, they deserve to know who you are. The silence stretched. Elias looked like he wanted to bolt, to be anywhere but here, having this conversation with a room full of strangers. But he'd come this far. And running wouldn't save Noah and Eliza. I had a brother, he finally said. Younger. We came west together, planning to homestead, make our fortune. I was supposed to watch out for him. That was the promise I made our mother before she died, that I'd keep him safe. He stopped, and the room waited. We got caught in a bad situation, claim jumpers. I had a chance to get him out, but I hesitated, thought I could talk our way through it instead of fight. I was wrong. His voice went flat. They shot him, took everything we had, left me alive because I wasn't worth the bullet. The weight of those words settled over the saloon like snow. So I went into the mountains, Elias continued, built a cabin as far from people as I could get, figured I didn't deserve their company anyway, and I stayed there. 11 years. No visitors, no friends, no contact except when I needed supplies once or twice a year. Until 3 weeks ago, Doc Hayes said quietly. Until 3 weeks ago. Elias nodded. I heard the children screaming from half a mile away, found them clinging to each other in the water, their parents already gone, and I thought— His throat worked. I thought maybe this was a chance to keep a promise instead of break one, to do it right this time. No one spoke. Even Pete Hancock, drunk and loud as he was, sat silent. So I'm asking, Elias said, and his voice cracked slightly on the words, the first real emotion breaking through. I'm asking if there's anyone at all, who'd be willing to help me keep that promise. I'm not a good man. I'm not educated or refined or any of the things a woman probably wants, but I swear I'll work every day to be worthy of the help. I'll provide for whoever comes, keep them safe, treat them with respect. He stopped, looked down at his hands, those scarred, work-roughened hands that had seen too much. I just need someone to help me not fail again. The silence that followed wasn't empty.
It was full of people thinking, weighing, considering, full of the kind of moment that could tip either way, where the difference between tragedy and hope was one person's decision. From the back of the room, a chair scraped against the floor. Everyone turned. A woman stood up. She had been sitting alone at a corner table, so quiet and still that most people had forgotten she was there. She wasn't young, somewhere in her mid-30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back severe and a face that had seen weather. Her dress was plain, dark wool, mended in places. Her hands were folded in front of her, steady. She looked at Elias across the room, and she spoke. "I'll do it." 3 heartbeats of absolute silence passed before the room erupted.
Clara, what are you? You can't be serious. Someone stop her before she...
But Clara Whitlock didn't sit back down. She stood there, chin level, eyes fixed on Elias with the same steady assessment she'd been giving him for the past 2 hours. Because she had been watching, even when no one noticed her in that back corner. Watching the way he stood patient against the mockery, the way his voice cracked only when he spoke about the children, the way his hands clenched when he mentioned breaking promises. Tom Murphy found his voice first. "Clara, you don't have to do this. Whatever you're thinking..." "I'm thinking clearly, Tom." Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Not soft. There was nothing soft about Clara Whitlock, but measured. More clearly than I have in months. She started walking toward Elias. The crowd parted without thinking, creating a path between them. Each step she took seemed to carve the decision deeper into reality. Judge Farrow stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitlock, I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. This isn't charity work or a temporary arrangement. This is marriage, legal and binding." "I know what marriage is, Judge." Something flickered across her face, too quick to name. "I've been married before." "Then you know it's not something to enter into lightly." "Nothing about my life has been light for a long time." She stopped a few feet from Elias, close enough to study him properly. Up close, he was taller than she'd thought, and harder used. There were scars on his hands, old ones that had healed white and raised. His eyes were dark, careful, and deeply tired. "I'm not doing this lightly. I'm doing it with full knowledge of what I'm agreeing to." Elias stared at her like she was an apparition that might vanish if he breathed wrong. "You don't know me." "No, I don't. You don't know anything about my life, my cabin, what you'd be walking into." "That's true." "Then why..." He stopped, shook his head like he was trying to clear it. "I don't understand." Clara tilted her head slightly, still studying him. "Can I ask you a question?" "Yes." "Not about the marriage, not about the legal requirements." She paused, choosing her words. "About the children. When you found them in that creek, when you pulled them out and took them to your cabin, did you know then that you'd have to do all this? Find a wife, come down here, stand in front of all these people?" Elias thought about it. "No, I just knew they needed help." "And when you did find out about the law, about the requirements, did you consider just letting them go? Would have been easier, cleaner. No one would have blamed you." His jaw tightened. "No." "Not even for a moment?" "Not even for a moment." Clara nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something she already suspected. "That's why." "That's why what?" "That's why I'll do it." She turned to Judge Farrow. "What do you need for me to make this legal?" The judge looked between them, his expression caught between concern and something that might have been reluctant approval. "I need verbal consent from both parties, witnessed by at least 2 people of sound mind. I need confirmation that neither of you is currently married to anyone else. And I need you both to understand that once I perform this ceremony, you're bound by it unless you go through legal dissolution proceedings." "I understand," Clara said. "Mr. Rowan?" Elias was still staring at Clara like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "I understand, but I need..." He looked at her. "I need you to really think about this. I live 16 miles up a mountain. The cabin is small, rough. Winter lasts 8 months. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. You'd be isolated. You'd be... alone?" Clara's mouth quirked, not quite a smile. "I'm already alone, Mr. Rowan. At least this way I'd be alone with purpose." Something in Elias's face shifted at that. Recognition, maybe. The look of one isolated person seeing another. "The children," he said quietly. "They're not easy right now. The girl won't talk most days. The boy has nightmares. They don't trust easily, and I can't blame them. You'd be taking on more than just keeping house. I know. Do you? His voice dropped lower, meant just for her despite the audience. Because I need to be clear. I'm not looking for someone to come up there and fix everything with kindness and patience. I'm looking for someone who can survive it, who can handle hard days and scared children, and a man who barely remembers how to live with other people. If you can't do that, if you have any doubt at all, Mr. Rowan? Clara's voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath it now. I buried my husband 8 months ago. I buried my daughter 2 months before that. I sold everything I owned because I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. I came west because there was nothing left for me back there, and I've been living in a boarding house room barely bigger than a closet, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life. She met his eyes directly. You're offering me a reason to get up in the morning. Don't question whether I can handle it. The saloon had gone quiet again. This time, it wasn't shock. It was the hush of people witnessing something private made public by necessity. Elias took a long breath. All right. All right? Yes. He looked at Judge Farrow. If Mrs. Whitlock is certain, I'm accepting her offer. Miss Whitlock, Clara corrected. I went back to my maiden name after my husband died. Seemed right. Miss Whitlock, Elias amended. The judge pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his forehead despite the cold. This is the strangest ceremony I've ever performed, and I once married 2 people who'd known each other for less than 3 hours on a bet. He looked around the room. I need 2 witnesses, sober ones, if possible. Doc Hayes stepped forward immediately. I'll stand witness. Reverend Mitchell joined him, as will I. Anyone object to this union? Judge Farrow asked the room at large. Speak now, because once I do this, it's done. Silence. Not the comfortable kind, the uneasy kind, where people had thoughts, but not the courage to voice them. Finally, Tom Murphy cleared his throat. Judge, maybe we should, give them a night to think it over. Clara's been through a lot. She might not be thinking straight. I'm thinking fine, Tom, Clara said without turning around. But it's late. You're tired. This is all happening so fast, which is exactly why it needs to happen now. Clara's voice was patient but firm. If I go back to my room and sleep on it, I'll talk myself out of it. I'll find 100 reasons why this is foolish, why I should stay where I am, why it's not my problem. And then tomorrow, that man will ride back up his mountain alone, and 2 children will be sent away, and I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have done something and chose not to. She finally turned to look at Tom. I've had enough of that kind of wondering, haven't you? Tom opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded slowly. All right, Clara. All right. Judge Farrow pulled a small Bible from his coat pocket. Whether for the ceremony or just habit, it wasn't clear. Then let's get this done. Mr. Rowan, Miss Whitlock, please face each other. They did. Elias moved stiffly, like his body was still catching up to what was happening. Clara was steadier, but her hands betrayed her. They were clasped tight in front of her, knuckles white. Do you, Elias Rowan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to honor and provide for according to the laws of this territory? Elias's voice was rough. I do. And do you, Clara Whitlock, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to honor and stand with according to the laws of this territory? Clara didn't hesitate. I do. By the authority vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I declare you married in the eyes of the law. What's bound here tonight can only be unbound through proper legal proceedings. Judge Farrow closed the Bible with a snap. That's it. You're married. Nobody cheered. Nobody clapped. It wasn't that kind of wedding. Doc Hayes stepped forward with a paper he'd pulled from somewhere. His medical bag, maybe. I'll draft the certificate. You'll both need to sign. While Doc Hayes scratched out the details with a pencil that needed sharpening, the saloon slowly remembered how to make noise again. Conversations resumed, but they were subdued, shot through with glances at the odd couple standing in the middle of the room. You'll need supplies, Tom said, transitioning from concern to practicality the way people do when they don't know what else to offer. If you're heading up the mountain with another person, you'll need more food stores, extra blankets. I'll manage, Elias said. The hell you will.
It's already November. You're looking at serious snow any day now. Tom was already mentally inventorying his shelves. I'll put together a pack. Basics. You can settle up next time you come down. I don't need charity. It's not charity, it's business. You'll pay me back. Tom's voice softened slightly. Besides, you're not just caring for yourself anymore. Pride's got no place in that. Elias looked like he wanted to argue, but Clara spoke up first. We'll take it. Thank you, Tom. The we hung in the air between them, the first acknowledgement that they were a unit now, whether they felt like it or not. Doc Hayes finished writing and held out the certificate. Sign here, both of you. Elias signed first, his handwriting cramped and unpracticed. Clara's signature was neater, the muscle memory of someone who'd once written letters and kept household accounts. When they were done, Doc Hayes handed the paper to Judge Farrow, who folded it carefully. I'll file this with the territorial office tomorrow. The confirmation will go out on the morning stage. He looked at Elias. That satisfy the requirement? Should. They wanted proof of marriage by sunrise. This is dated tonight. Then the children are safe. For the first time since entering the saloon, something in Elias's shoulders loosened. Not relief exactly. The situation was too strange for that, but the easing of immediate crisis. Yes, thank you, Judge. Don't thank me. Thank your wife. The word sounded foreign in that context. Wife. Clara tested it silently, the shape of it in her mind. She'd been a wife before, but that had been built on courtship and promises and a future they'd planned together. This was something else entirely, a legal agreement wrapped around desperate need. The fact that she'd agreed to it still felt surreal, like she was watching someone else make these decisions. Mrs. Rowan, Reverend Mitchell, spoke up, using her new name before she'd had time to adjust to it. Do you have belongings that need collecting? I'd be happy to help gather them from wherever you're staying. The boarding house, Clara said. But there's not much, a bag and a trunk. I can get them myself. At this hour? Mrs. Abernathy will have locked up already. Then I'll wake her. That'll go over well, Tom muttered, but he was already pulling bottles down from the shelf, packing them carefully in a crate. That woman's meaner than a bear with a sore tooth when someone wakes her after 9. Clara almost smiled. I've dealt with worse than Mrs. Abernathy. While Tom assembled supplies and Doc Hayes made notes about the certificate, Clara and Elias stood in an awkward orbit of each other, neither quite sure what to do now. They were married, legally bound, but they were still strangers who hadn't even shaken hands. Finally, Elias spoke. I have a wagon outside. Not much of one, but it'll hold supplies and your things. All right, we should leave as soon as we can. The trail's hard enough in daylight. In the dark it's worse, but waiting until morning means the children will be alone longer, and... He stopped. They'll be scared. I told them I'd be back by dawn at the latest. Clara nodded. Then we should go. You're not going to change first? One of the saloon girls, a young woman named Daisy, spoke up. That's your wedding dress? Clara looked down at her plain wool dress, mended and faded. It's the dress I have. It'll do. But you should have something nice, something to remember. I'll remember tonight just fine without a fancy dress. Clara's voice wasn't sharp, just definitive. Besides, where I'm going, fancy dresses won't be much use. Daisy fell silent, but her expression said what her mouth didn't, that this was the saddest wedding she'd ever seen. Maybe it was. But Clara had been to sad things before. She knew the difference between sad and necessary, and right now necessary was what mattered. I need to ask you something, Elias said, low enough that only Clara could hear. About the sleeping arrangements. Clara felt her spine stiffen slightly. All right. The cabin has 2 rooms, one main room with the stove and my bed, one smaller room where I've been keeping the children. Once we get there, you'll take my bed. I'll sleep in the main room by the stove. The children can stay where they are. Relief, small but definite, unknotted something in Clara's chest. That's fine. I'm not... Elias struggled for words. This marriage is legal. It has to be. But it doesn't have to be more than that unless you decide otherwise. I won't assume anything. I appreciate that. And the children, Noah and Eliza, they don't need to call you mother or anything like that. Not unless they want to. You can just be Clara. That's enough. All right. They fell quiet again. Around them, the saloon continued its strange half-celebration, half-wake atmosphere. Some people were drinking to the odd couple, others were drinking because they didn't know what else to do with the feelings the night had stirred up. Pete Hancock, drunk enough to be sentimental, raised his glass. To the bride and groom, may they have a good life up there on that mountain. A few people echoed the toast, more out of habit than enthusiasm. Elias and Clara didn't drink. Neither of them had touched alcohol all night. Tom finished packing the supplies and hefted the crate with a grunt. This should get you through until you can make it back down for more. I put in extra flour, some dried meat, coffee, sugar, some hard candy for the kids. You didn't have to. I know I didn't have to. I'm doing it anyway. Tom's voice was gruff, covering whatever he was actually feeling. Now get out of here before that storm hits. I can smell snow coming. He was right. Even inside, the air had that particular weight to it, the pressure change that came before serious weather. Elias turned to Clara. I'll bring the wagon around to the boarding house. Meet you there in 10 minutes? Make it 15. I need to actually wake Mrs. Abernathy and get my things. 15 then. He left through the same door he'd entered, moving quickly now that there was a plan, a path forward. The cold air rushed in and out as the door swung shut behind him. Clara stood in the center of the saloon, suddenly aware of all the eyes on her. These people weren't friends. She'd only been in Aspen Bend for 2 weeks, had kept mostly to herself. But they felt like witnesses to something significant, or maybe just strange. Clara. Tom came around the bar, his face serious. You sure about this? No, she said honestly, but I'm doing it anyway. That's not a good reason. It's the only reason I have. She looked at him. How long have you known me, Tom? 2 weeks. Maybe a little less. In that time, have I seemed like someone who makes impulsive decisions? Tom thought about it. No, you've seemed like someone barely holding on. Exactly. Clara pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I've been barely holding on for 8 months. Waking up, going through the motions, trying to find a reason to keep doing it. Tonight, a reason walked through that door. Maybe it's not the reason I would have chosen if I'd had time to think, but it's real. Those children are real. The need is real. That's more than I've had in a long time. Tom studied her for a long moment. Then he reached under the bar and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. This was my wife's. She died 3 years ago. I've been meaning to do something with it, but I never got around to it. Tom, I can't. You can and you will. He pressed it into her hands. Open it later. When you need something to remind you that people can be good sometimes. Claire's throat tightened. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't die up there, all right? Come back down once in a while so we know you're alive. I will. She turned to leave, then stopped. Tom? The man who came in tonight, Elias, do you know anything about him? Anything at all? Tom shook his head. Never seen him before. But I'll tell you what I do know. A man who lives alone for 11 years and then walks into a crowded room asking for help. That takes something. Desperation, maybe. But also courage. Most people would have just let those kids go rather than face this kind of exposure. He paused. Doesn't mean he's a good man, but it means he's trying to be. Clara nodded slowly. That's what I thought too. The walk to the boarding house took less than 5 minutes, but it felt longer. The streets of Aspen Bend were mostly empty now, just a few late stragglers making their way home. The wind had picked up, sharp and insistent, carrying the first tiny ice crystals that weren't quite snow yet, but would be soon. Clara let herself into the boarding house with the key Mrs. Abernathy had given her. The downstairs was dark, except for one lamp left burning in the hall. She climbed the stairs as quietly as she could, hoping to avoid... Miss Whitlock. Clara turned. Mrs. Abernathy stood at the bottom of the stairs in her dressing gown, her gray hair in a long braid, her expression severe. She was a woman in her 60s who'd run this boarding house for 20 years and had opinions about everything. I'm sorry to disturb you, Mrs. Abernathy. I need to collect my things. At this hour? Where on earth are you going? Clara hesitated. The truth sounded insane, but lies had never been her strength. I just got married. I'm leaving tonight. Mrs. Abernathy's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. Married? To whom? A man named Elias Rowan. He lives up in the mountains. That wild man who came through here last week asking questions at the land office? Mrs. Abernathy's voice rose.
The one who looked like he hadn't seen civilization in a decade? That's him. Have you lost your mind? Possibly. Clara started up the stairs again. But it's done now. I just need to get my belongings. Mrs. Abernathy followed her up, still sputtering. You can't just leave in the middle of the night with a stranger. What about your room? Your rent is paid through the end of the month. Keep it. Consider it payment for the trouble. I don't want payment. I want an explanation. You've been here 2 weeks, barely said 10 words to anyone, and now you're running off to the wilderness with some mountain man? Clara reached her room, small, spare, exactly as impersonal as she'd kept it. Her trunk sat in the corner, still mostly packed. She'd never really unpacked, never really settled. Some part of her had known she wouldn't stay. There are 2 orphaned children, Clara said as she started gathering her few scattered belongings. Their parents died. The man who's caring for them will lose them unless he has a wife. I agreed to help. By marrying him? Mrs. Abernathy's voice was sharp. That's not help. That's insanity. Maybe. Clara folded a nightgown, placed it in her bag. But those children need someone, and She stopped, her hand stilling on the fabric. I need to be needed. Do you understand? I spent months trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with the rest of my life, and every answer I came up with felt hollow. But this is real. This matters. Mrs. Abernathy was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler. You're running away from grief. I know. That never works. It follows you. I know that too. Clara looked up. But at least if I'm running toward something useful, the grief will have to keep up. And maybe by the time it catches up, I'll be strong enough to face it. The older woman sighed, a sound heavy with resignation and reluctant understanding. You'll write to me. Let me know you're safe. I'll try. Not try. Do. Once a month at least. Or I'll assume you're dead and send someone up there looking. Clara almost smiled. Once a month. She finished packing quickly. There wasn't much to gather. 1 bag of clothes, 1 trunk containing the few possessions she'd carried west. Books, mostly. A few letters she couldn't bring herself to throw away. A daguerreotype of her daughter, age 3, before the scarlet fever came. She picked up the photograph, studied it in the dim lamplight. Elizabeth, named after Clara's mother, taken before she even learned to write her own name. For a moment, the grief Mrs. Abernathy had mentioned rose up sharp and choking, threatening to undo the fragile purpose Clara had constructed tonight. Then she heard a wagon outside. She wrapped the photograph carefully, placed it in the trunk, and closed the lid. I'm ready, she said. Mrs. Abernathy helped her carry the trunk downstairs despite her disapproval. Outside, Elias was waiting with a wagon that had seen better days. The wheels were mismatched, the boards weathered almost gray. But the horse was sturdy, and the wagon bed was already loaded with the supplies Tom had packed. Elias jumped down when he saw them. I can take that. He lifted Clara's trunk like it weighed nothing, settling it in the wagon bed next to the crates. Then he turned to Mrs. Abernathy, something awkward in his posture. I'll take care of her, he said. Mrs. Abernathy looked him up and down, her expression unreadable. You better, because if anything happens to Clara Whitlock, Clara Rowan now, I suppose, I will personally come up that mountain and make you regret it. Yes, ma'am. I mean it. I've lived in this territory 40 years. I know where to find people who can make problems disappear. Despite everything, Elias's mouth twitched. I believe you. Mrs. Abernathy turned to Clara, and her stern expression cracked slightly. You're a fool, but you're a good-hearted fool. Try to stay alive. I will. The older woman pulled Clara into a quick, fierce hug. Once a month, she whispered, don't make me come looking. Then she released Clara, turned on her heel, and went back inside without another word. Elias helped Clara up onto the wagon seat. She settled there, her bag clutched in her lap, and for the first time since standing up in the saloon, she felt the full weight of what she'd done. She was sitting in a stranger's wagon, about to ride into the mountains in the dark, to live in a cabin she'd never seen with children she'd never met, and a man whose face she could barely make out in the dim light. Her hands started to shake. Elias climbed up beside her, took the reins. He noticed the shaking. She could tell by the way his eyes flicked toward her hands, but he didn't comment on it. It's about 4 hours to the cabin, he said. Rough trail, especially in the dark. There's a blanket behind the seat if you get cold. Thank you. He clicked to the horse, and the wagon lurched into motion. Aspen Bend fell away behind them quickly. It wasn't large enough to take long to leave. Within minutes, they were on the trail heading north, the darkness closing in on all sides except where the wagon's single lantern pushed it back. They rode in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the wagon wheels, the horse's hooves, and the wind picking up through the trees. Clara pulled the blanket around her shoulders, but she wasn't sure if she was shaking from cold or shock. Finally, Elias spoke. You can change your mind. Clara looked at him. What? If you want to go back, we can turn around. I'll tell the territorial office I lied. Take whatever consequences come. You don't have to do this. You'd lose the children. I know, but that's not your burden to carry. You didn't ask for any of this. Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, Tell me about them. The children. Elias's hands tightened on the reins. What do you want to know? Anything. Everything. If I'm going to do this, I should know who I'm doing it for. He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, Noah's 8, small for his age but strong. He doesn't talk much, didn't even before his parents died. He watches everything, remembers everything. Smart kid, careful. Elias paused. He's scared, but he hides it. Acts tough because he thinks he has to protect his sister. And Eliza? 5. Used to be chatty, according to what little Noah told me about before. Now she barely talks at all. She'll whisper to Noah sometimes, but that's it. She has nightmares every night, wakes up screaming. His voice went rough. I don't know how to help with that. I try, but I'm not good at comfort. Clara heard the helplessness in his voice, the frustration of a man who could build shelter and hunt food, but couldn't fix a child's broken heart. What do they look like? She asked. Noah's got dark hair, brown eyes, serious face. Eliza's blonde, blue eyes. She's got a smile that could light up a room, but I've only seen it twice since I found them. He glanced at Clara. They'll be suspicious of you at first. Might not even talk to you. Don't take it personal. I won't. More silence. The trail was climbing now. Clara could feel it in the way the wagon strained. The trees pressed closer on both sides, dark shapes against darker sky. Can I ask you something? Elias said. Yes. In the saloon, you said you lost your daughter. How? He stopped. I'm sorry. That's not my business. Scarlet fever, Clara said, surprised at how steady her voice was. She was 3. It took her in 2 days. My husband, he blamed himself, thought he should have gotten the doctor sooner, should have done something different. He died 6 months later. Doctor said it was his heart, but I think it was grief. I'm sorry. So am I. Clara pulled the blanket tighter. I spent months trying to figure out how to keep living. Everyone kept telling me it would get easier, that time would help, but it didn't. It just made the silence louder. Coming west was supposed to be a fresh start, but I brought all the silence with me. And now? Now I'm here. She looked at him. Married to a stranger, riding up a mountain in the dark to take care of someone else's children. It's insane. Yes, but it's also something. It's movement. It's purpose, even if I don't fully understand it yet. She paused. You asked if I wanted to turn back. The answer is no. I'm scared and I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm not going back. Elias nodded slowly. All right then. They rode on through the darkness, 2 broken people heading toward an uncertain future, bound together by law and desperation, and something neither of them could quite name yet. The snow started falling an hour later, small flakes at first, then thicker, faster. Elias urged the horse on, trying to make time before the trail became impassable. Clara held on to the wagon seat as they jolted over roots and rocks, her teeth chattering despite the blanket. Not much further, Elias said, though Clara wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. Finally, through the snow and darkness, she saw a light, small, flickering, a lamp in a window. That's it, Elias said. That's home. The cabin was smaller than Clara had imagined, just a dark shape against the mountainside. But that lamp in the window, that felt like something, a signal, a promise. As they pulled up, the cabin door opened. A small figure stood silhouetted against the light inside. Elias? A boy's voice, tight with worry. You came back. I came back. Elias set the brake, jumped down. Noah, I brought someone. Her name is Clara. He hesitated. She's going to be staying with us.
The boy, Noah, stared at Clara as she climbed carefully down from the wagon. His face was wary, closed off. "Why?" he asked. It was Elias who answered. "Because I needed help, and she was willing to give it." Noah didn't respond to that. He just stood there, a too-thin boy trying to fill a doorway, protecting something behind him.
Clara took a step forward, careful not to move too fast. "Hello, Noah." He didn't answer, just watched her with eyes that had seen too much. From inside the cabin, a small voice called out, "Noah? Who is it?" "Just Elias," Noah called back. "And someone else." Clara felt something crack inside her chest. That small voice, frightened and trying not to show it. It reminded her of Elizabeth, the way her daughter used to call out in the night. She looked at Elias. He was watching her, waiting to see if she'd run now that the reality was here in front of her. She didn't run. Instead, she walked forward toward the cabin, toward two children who didn't know her and had no reason to trust her, toward a life she'd chosen in a moment of desperate need, toward whatever came next. The inside of the cabin was exactly what Clara had expected, and somehow worse. One room served as everything: kitchen, living space, workshop. A cast iron stove squatted in the center, radiating heat that didn't quite reach the corners. The walls were rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud and moss, some of it crumbling. A table made from split planks, two chairs that didn't match, shelves holding supplies in no particular order. Everything was functional, nothing was comfortable. And in the corner, on a pallet of blankets and furs, sat a little girl with blonde hair tangled around her face and eyes too big for her small features. Eliza. She stared at Clara without blinking, one hand clutched around a piece of fabric that might have once been part of a dress. Her other hand was wrapped tight around Noah's pant leg, even though he'd moved to stand between her and the strangers. "It's all right, Liza," Noah said quietly, not taking his eyes off Clara. "Elias came back like he said." The little girl didn't respond, just kept staring. Clara set her bag down carefully, trying not to make sudden movements. The air in the cabin was thick with distrust, and the smell of wood smoke and something cooking, beans probably, from the pot still sitting on the stove. Elias came in behind her, carrying her trunk on his shoulder like it weighed nothing. He set it down against the wall, then stood there awkwardly, a man who'd lived alone so long he'd forgotten how to navigate shared space. "You eatin'?" he asked Noah. "Yeah, she wouldn't eat much, though." Noah's voice was flat, reporting facts. "She had some bread, couple bites of beans." Elias nodded, filing this information away. "That's all right, long as she had something." He moved to the stove, checking the pot. Clara watched him, noticing the way he moved around the children. Careful, deliberate, making sure they always knew where he was, like someone working with spooked animals. "There's enough here for you," Elias said to Clara. "If you're hungry." She wasn't really. Her stomach was tight with nerves, but she understood the offer for what it was, an attempt at normalcy, at hospitality. "Thank you. Maybe a little." Elias ladled beans into a tin bowl, handed it to her along with a spoon that had seen better days. Clara took it, found a spot at the table that wasn't covered in tools or supplies, and sat down. Noah watched her eat for a moment, then looked at Elias. "You didn't say why she's here." "I told you, she's helping." "Helping with what?" Elias pulled out the other chair, sat heavily. The exhaustion of the night was catching up with him now, showing in the slope of his shoulders. "You remember what I told you before I left? About the law?" Noah's jaw tightened. "Yeah." "Well, the law said I needed a wife to keep you and Eliza here, so I found one." He gestured toward Clara. "This is Clara. We got married tonight." The silence that followed was profound. Noah's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, something that might have been anger, before settling on blank wariness. "You married a stranger," he said slowly, "to keep us." "Yes. That's crazy." "Maybe, but it's done." Noah turned to Clara, studying her with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. "You agreed to this?" Clara met his eyes. "I did." "Why?" It was the same question everyone had asked, and Clara still didn't have a simple answer. "Because you needed help, and I needed something to do that mattered. We're not charity. I know you're not. And we don't need a mother. We already had one. The words came out sharp, defensive. Clara saw Elias tense, ready to intervene, but she shook her head slightly. "I know you did," she said quietly, "and I'm not trying to replace her. I can't do that, and I won't try. I'm here to help, that's all." Noah didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he turned back to Elias. "Where's she sleeping?" "In my room. I'll take the main room." "And we stay where we are?" "Unless you want different, but yeah, that was the plan." Noah nodded slowly, processing this. Then, without another word, he turned and went back to his sister. He sat down on the pallet beside her, and immediately her small hand found his. They sat there together, a unit of two against the world, watching the adults with identical expressions of mistrust. Clara's chest ached looking at them. They were so small, so fiercely protective of each other. Noah couldn't have weighed more than 60 pounds soaking wet, all sharp edges and nervous energy. Eliza was tiny, delicate, the kind of child who looked like a strong wind could blow her away. "I should show you the room," Elias said, breaking the awkward silence. "Get you settled." Clara followed him to a door she hadn't noticed at first. It blended into the wall, just rough boards on leather hinges. Elias pushed it open, and Clara stepped into a space barely bigger than the boarding house room she'd just left. A bed frame made from stripped logs. A mattress stuffed with something that crinkled. Straw, probably, or dried grass. One blanket, no pillow. A shelf on the wall holding nothing. A window so small it barely deserved the name, covered with oiled paper instead of glass. "I know it's not much," Elias said from the doorway. He didn't come in, respecting some boundary Clara hadn't even known she needed. "I can bring in more blankets, get you a proper pillow next time I'm in town." "It's fine." Clara set her bag down on the bed. The frame creaked under the weight. "I've slept in worse." "Still, you should be comfortable." "Comfort's not why I'm here." Elias studied her for a moment, like he was trying to figure out if she meant that or was just being polite. "Your trunk's still out there. I can bring it in if you want to unpack." "In the morning is fine. Clara stopped, suddenly aware of how bone-tired she was. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was draining away, leaving her shaky and hollow. "I'm exhausted." "Then I'll let you rest." Elias started to leave, then paused. "Clara?" "Yes?" "Thank you for doing this. I know it's—" He gestured vaguely, unable to find words for what it was. "Just thank you. You're welcome." He left, closing the door behind him. Clara stood in the small room, listening to the muffled sounds from the other side. Elias moving around, the low murmur of his voice talking to Noah, the creak of floorboards. She sat on the bed. It was harder than she'd expected, the mattress offering almost no give. Through the thin walls, she could hear everything. Elias telling Noah to bank the fire. Noah asking something too quiet to make out. Eliza's small voice, just a whisper, saying something that made Noah respond with forced cheerfulness. This was her life now. This cabin, these people, this strange arrangement built on desperation and legal necessity. Clara lay down without even taking off her dress. The ceiling above her was rough logs, gaps between them stuffed with moss. She could see stars through one small crack, tiny points of light in the darkness. She thought about her daughter, about her husband, about the life she'd built and lost and left behind, about how she'd stood in a saloon just hours ago and agreed to marry a stranger. The exhaustion pulled her under before she could decide if she'd made a terrible mistake. She woke to voices arguing in harsh whispers. For a moment, Clara couldn't remember where she was. The ceiling was wrong. The sounds were wrong. Everything was wrong. Then it came back. The cabin, the mountain, the marriage. Pale light filtered through the oiled paper window. Dawn, or close to it. "Not fair to just bring someone here without asking us." That was Noah's voice, tight with anger. "I didn't have time to ask. The law doesn't wait for children's opinions." Elias, patient but firm. "We're not children, we're people, and this affects us." "I know it does. That's why I did it, to keep you safe." "Safe?" Noah's voice cracked. "How is living with a stranger safe?" "Safer than Cheyenne. Safer than being separated, put in different homes, never seeing each other again. You want that?" Silence. Then quietly, "No." "Neither do I. So this is what we have. Clara's here, she's staying, and you're going to treat her with respect, even if you don't like it. You can't make me like her. I'm not asking you to like her. I'm asking you not to make this harder than it already is. More silence. Clara lay still, barely breathing, feeling like an intruder in her own life. Does she know? Noah asked, his voice different now, smaller. Know what? About Mama and Papa. About what happened. She knows they drowned. That's all she needs to know right now.
But if she's staying, if she's supposed to be taking care of us, shouldn't she know everything? Maybe eventually, but not now. Some things are private, Noah. Some things are just ours. The boy didn't respond to that. Clara heard movement, feet on the floor, the scrape of a chair. Then Elias spoke again, his voice gentler. I know this is hard. I know you're scared and angry, and you don't understand why things have to be this way, but I need you to trust me. Just for a little while, can you do that? A long pause. Then, I guess. That's all I'm asking. Clara waited until she heard Noah move away, heard the cabin door open and close, before she got up. Her dress was wrinkled from sleeping in it, her hair a mess. She had no mirror, no brush handy, no way to make herself presentable. She did the best she could with her fingers, then opened the door. Elias was at the stove, poking at the coals, building up the fire. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the same exhaustion in his face that she felt in her bones. Morning, he said. Morning. Where's Noah? Outside, checking the snares. It's his morning job. And Eliza? Still sleeping, she usually sleeps late. Nightmares keep her up. He straightened, wiping ash from his hands. There's coffee. It's not good, but it's hot. Clara poured herself a cup from the pot on the stove. He was right. It wasn't good. Bitter and weak at the same time, like someone had used the grounds 3 times already. But it was warm, and right now that was enough. I heard you talking, she said, with Noah. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to listen, but the walls are thin. I know. Elias didn't look embarrassed or angry, just resigned. He's angry about all this. Can't blame him. He has a right to be. Maybe, but he'll have to get used to it. Elias poured his own coffee, leaned against the wall. I need to go into town this morning, send the confirmation that you're here, that we're married, make it official so the territorial agent can't take them when he shows up. When does he arrive? Tomorrow. Maybe the day after, if the snow slows him down. Tomorrow. Clara had less than a day to figure out how to navigate this situation before some government official showed up to inspect their arrangement. What happens when he comes? She asked. He'll ask questions. Look around. Make sure the children are being cared for properly. As long as everything looks legitimate, he'll leave them here. And if it doesn't look legitimate? Elias met her eyes. Then he takes them. That's why we have to make this work. At least on the surface. On the surface, Clara repeated. The words tasted bitter, like the coffee. The door opened and Noah came in, carrying 2 rabbits by their feet. He saw Clara and his expression closed off immediately, all the vulnerability she'd heard in his voice gone behind a wall of suspicion. Caught 2, he said to Elias, ignoring Clara completely. Good work. We'll have those for dinner. Elias took the rabbits, examining them. These are clean kills. You're getting better with the snares. Something like pride flickered across Noah's face before he suppressed it. Papa taught me. Before. The word Papa hung in the air, deliberate. A reminder that these children had a family, had a life before all this, that Clara was an outsider, an intruder. I remember, Elias said quietly. He would have been proud of how well you've learned. Noah's jaw tightened. He looked at the rabbits instead of at either adult. I'm going to go check the woodpile. He left before anyone could respond, the door slamming behind him harder than necessary. Clara set down her coffee cup. He hates me. He doesn't hate you. He hates the situation. Elias hung the rabbits on a hook near the door. Give him time. He'll come around. Will he? Because from where I'm standing, I'm the person who disrupted his life. I'm the stranger living in his house. Why would he ever trust me? Pop, because eventually he'll see that you're trying to help, that you're not here to hurt him. Trying isn't the same as succeeding. No, Elias agreed, but it's a start. A small sound from the corner made them both turn. Eliza was awake, sitting up on her pallet, watching them with those 2 big eyes. Her hair was a tangled mess around her face, and she clutched that piece of fabric to her chest like a lifeline. Morning, Eliza, Elias said, his voice automatically gentling. You sleep okay? She didn't answer, just stared at Clara. Clara knelt down slowly, making herself smaller, less threatening. Hello, Eliza. My name is Clara. I know you probably don't remember me from last night. It was dark, and you were tired. Still no response. The little girl's eyes tracked Clara's every movement, wary as a wild thing. Are you hungry? Clara tried. I could make you something to eat. Eggs, maybe, if there are any, or porridge. Eliza's grip on the fabric tightened. Clara could see her knuckles going white. She doesn't talk much, Elias said from behind Clara. To anyone except Noah. That's all right. She doesn't have to talk if she doesn't want to. Clara sat back on her heels, giving Eliza space. But if you get hungry, Eliza, just let me know. I'll make you whatever you want. The little girl blinked once, twice. Then she lay back down, turning to face the wall, curling into a tight ball. Clara stood up slowly, feeling the failure of that interaction settle into her bones. This was going to be harder than she'd thought. Much harder. I need to go, Elias said, already pulling on his heavy coat. I'll be back by midday. There's food in the stores, dried meat, beans, some flour, coffee, obviously. He gestured to the shelves. Make whatever you think is right. The children will eat if they get hungry enough. All right. He paused at the door, his hand on the latch. Clara, try not to... He stopped, searching for words. Try not to take it personal, what they're doing, the silence, the suspicion. It's not about you, it's about everything they've lost. I know. He nodded, then left. Clara heard his footsteps, the sound of him preparing the wagon, the creak of wheels as he drove away. And then it was just her and the children, 2 children who didn't want her there, in a cabin she didn't know, trying to figure out how to make this impossible situation work. She started with the practical things. There were dishes from last night, so she washed them. The water had to be heated on the stove first, and she had to find the soap, a rough lye soap that made her hands sting. But it was something to do, a task with a clear beginning and end. Noah came back in while she was working. He went straight to Eliza, knelt beside her, whispered something Clara couldn't hear. The little girl whispered back, and Noah nodded. She needs the privy, he announced to Clara, his tone flat. All right, I can take her. No, I'll do it. He helped Eliza stand, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and led her outside. Clara finished the dishes in silence. Then she swept the floor, even though it didn't really need it. Organized the shelves, which did need it. Whoever had been managing the supplies had no system. She found things in strange places, coffee next to nails, dried beans mixed with bullets. By the time Noah and Eliza came back, Clara had made porridge. It was simple, basic, but it was hot and filling. She dished it into 2 bowls, added a little of the sugar she'd found in the stores. I made breakfast, she said. If you're hungry. Noah looked at the bowls suspiciously. What is it? Porridge, with sugar. We don't like porridge. Clara had no way of knowing if that was true or if he was just being difficult. All right, what do you like? Doesn't matter, we can feed ourselves. I know you can, but I made this and it'll just go to waste if you don't eat it. Noah's jaw set in a stubborn line, but Eliza was looking at the bowls with something like interest, and Clara saw him notice. Fine, he said, but just because she's hungry. He took both bowls, carried them back to the corner, and they ate there together, away from Clara. It wasn't what she'd hoped for, but it was something. They were eating. That was progress, however small. Clara ate her own portion standing at the stove, looking out the small window at the snow-covered landscape beyond. The cabin was in a clearing, surrounded by pine trees so tall they seemed to touch the sky. Mountains rose in every direction, gray and imposing. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. It was also the most isolated place Clara had ever been. The morning dragged on. Clara tried to make conversation with the children a few times, but Noah shut her down each time with one-word answers or silence. Eliza didn't even try to respond, just watched Clara with those big, wary eyes. Finally, Clara gave up and went outside. She needed air, space, distance from the weight of their distrust. The cold hit her like a wall. She'd lived through eastern winters, but this was different, sharper, meaner, the kind of cold that found every gap in your clothing and exploited it. She wrapped her arms around herself and walked a small circuit around the cabin, just to move, to do something. That's when she noticed the garden plot, or what had been a garden plot, now buried under snow.
Someone had built raised beds, carefully constructed to maximize the short growing season, but they'd been neglected recently. Weeds poking through the snow, the fence around it sagging. Clara looked at it for a long time, thinking. Then she went back inside. Noah was sitting at the table now, working on something with a knife. Whittling, she realized. He was carving a piece of wood into something, though she couldn't tell what yet. "There's a garden," she said. He didn't look up. "Yeah." "Did your parents plant it?" His hand slipped, the knife biting into the wood wrong. He cursed under his breath, a word too old for him, and threw the piece down. "What do you care about the garden?" "I'm just asking." "Well, don't. Don't ask about them. Don't talk about them. Just leave it alone." He stormed past her, out the door, slamming it hard enough to make the walls shake. Clara stood there, feeling the failure of it. She was making everything worse. Every attempt to connect, to help, just drove them further away. Eliza was watching from her corner. For the first time, Clara looked at her and said what she was really thinking. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said quietly. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to help you, or your brother, or any of this. I wanted to help. But I don't think I can." Eliza stared at her. Then, so quietly, Clara almost missed it, she spoke. "Noah's scared." Clara froze. It was the first time Eliza had spoken to her directly. "Scared of what?" she asked gently. But Eliza had said all she was going to say. She lay back down, facing the wall again, retreating into silence. Clara went to the door, looked out at Noah. He was standing at the edge of the tree line, his back to the cabin, his shoulders shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He was crying, trying to hide it, but crying. Every instinct told Clara to go to him, to offer comfort, but she knew with the certainty of her own grief, that sometimes the worst thing you can do is try to fix someone who's breaking. Sometimes they just need to break. So she stayed in the doorway, close enough to help if he needed it, far enough to give him privacy. And she waited. When Elias returned around noon, he found Clara sitting on the front step despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. He climbed down from the wagon, studied her face. "Bad morning?" "I don't think I can do this," Clara said. Elias sat down beside her on the step. They sat in silence for a moment, breath fogging in the cold air. "Noah told you to leave them alone," he finally said. It wasn't a question. "Among other things. And Eliza won't talk." She said one thing, that Noah's scared. He is. They both are. Elias looked out at the trees. They lost everything, their parents, their home, their whole world. And now there's this stranger living with them who they're supposed to trust. It's too much. "So what do I do?" "Nothing." Clara looked at him. "Nothing?" "Nothing. Don't try to fix them. Don't try to make them love you or trust you or even like you. Just exist. Be here. Be consistent. Show up every day and don't leave." He paused. "Eventually they'll realize you're not going anywhere, that you're safe, but that takes time." "How much time?" "I don't know. Months, maybe longer." He glanced at her. "Think you can handle that?" Clara thought about it. About spending months in this cabin with two children who resented her, doing nothing but existing and waiting. It sounded like a special kind of torture. It also sounded doable. "Yeah," she said, "I can handle that." "Good. Because the territorial agent arrives tomorrow, and we need to convince him that this is a real household, that we're capable of caring for these children." "How do we do that?" Elias stood up, brushed snow off his pants. "We act like a family, even if we're not one yet." That night, they had their first dinner together. Elias cooked the rabbits Noah had caught, and Clara made biscuits from the flour stores. They weren't good biscuits, too dense, not enough lard, but they were edible. They sat at the table together, the four of them. Noah and Eliza on one side, Elias and Clara on the other. An arrangement that looked like a family, even if it didn't feel like one. Nobody spoke much. The silence was awkward, heavy with everything unsaid. But they ate together, and when Eliza finished her portion, she looked at Clara and whispered, "Thank you." It was barely audible, but it was there. Clara felt something in her chest unclench, just a little. "You're welcome," she whispered back. After dinner,
Elias sent the children to wash up while he and Clara cleaned the dishes together. They worked in silence, falling into an accidental rhythm. She washed, he dried.
The agent will be here by noon tomorrow, Elias said quietly. His name is Harrison. He's not a bad man, but he follows the rules exactly. No flexibility. What will he ask? Questions about our living arrangements, how we manage the household, whether the children are being fed, clothed, educated properly. He set down a plate. He'll want to see that we sleep in separate rooms, proof that this is a legitimate marriage, not just a legal trick. We do sleep in separate rooms.
I know, but he might ask the children, try to catch us in a lie. Clara absorbed this. So we need to make sure they know what to say, without making it obvious that we told them what to say. Elias rubbed his face, tired. This whole thing is built on a lie, Clara. We're lying to the government, lying to the children about what this marriage is, lying to ourselves about whether this can actually work. I know. Does that bother you?
Clara thought about it.
No, because the truth, that these children would be separated and sent away, that's worse than any lie we're telling. So if we have to lie to keep them together, I'll lie. Elias looked at her with something like respect. You're tougher than you look. I've had to be. They finished the dishes in silence. Then Elias called the children over. Tomorrow a man is coming, he told them, sitting down so he was at their level. His name is Mr. Harrison, and he's from the territorial office. He's going to ask you questions. Noah's face went tight with fear. Is he taking us away? No, not if we do this right. Elias glanced at Clara, then back to the children. He's going to ask about Clara, about whether she lives here, whether she helps take care of you, and you need to tell him yes. But she just got here. I know, but he doesn't need to know that. As far as Mr. Harrison is concerned, Clara's been here for weeks. She's my wife, she helps with cooking and cleaning, and she takes care of you both, understand? Noah looked mutinous. You want us to lie. I want you to stay together. This is how we make that happen. The boy and Elias stared at each other, a battle of wills. Finally, Noah looked away. Fine, he muttered. We'll say what you want. Not what I want. What's necessary. Elias's voice was firm but not unkind. And Eliza, if he asks you questions, you can answer or not. But if you do answer, remember, Clara's been here a while. She's part of the house. All right? Eliza nodded, her eyes wide. Good. Now get ready for bed, both of you. The children retreated to their corner. Clara watched them prepare for sleep, Noah helping Eliza change into a nightshirt too big for her, probably one of his old ones. Him checking under the pallet for something, though Clara couldn't see what. The two of them whispering together, making a plan or sharing fears, or just being siblings. Clara and Elias stayed up later, reviewing the story, making sure their lies aligned, preparing for tomorrow's inspection like students cramming for a test that would determine everything. What if he doesn't believe us? Clara asked. Then he takes them, and we have to start over somehow. There's no starting over. If he takes them tomorrow, they're gone. I know. Elias stared into the fire. So he has to believe us. Clara went to bed that night with her mind spinning. She lay in the dark, listening to the cabin settle around her, and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. An inspector who would determine if her hasty marriage and this desperate arrangement was enough to keep two broken children together. She thought about Noah's anger, Eliza's silence, Elias's determination. She thought about her own daughter buried thousands of miles away and wondered if Elizabeth would understand why she'd done this, if anyone would understand. Through the wall she heard Eliza cry out, a nightmare. Then Noah's voice, soft and soothing, talking his sister back to calm. The murmur went on for a long time before silence fell again. Clara closed her eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not, and they would all have to be convincing enough to make a stranger believe that this broken, desperate arrangement was actually a home. Morning came too early and too bright. Clara woke to the sound of Elias already moving around in the main room, building up the fire, the scrape of metal on metal as he adjusted the stove grate. She lay still for a moment, gathering herself for what was ahead, then forced herself up. Her second dress, the better one she'd packed for exactly this kind of occasion, was wrinkled from the trunk. She tried to smooth it with her hands, then gave up. It would have to do. She braided her hair back tight, pinched her cheeks to bring some color into them, and opened the door. Elias looked up from the stove. He'd shaved, she noticed.
The heavy beard that had made him look half wild was gone, revealing a face younger than she'd thought, maybe late 30s with a strong jaw and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He'd also put on a clean shirt, or at least cleaner than the one he usually wore. "You look presentable," she said. "So do you." He poured coffee, handed her a cup. "The children are still sleeping. I figure we let them rest until the last possible moment. Less time for them to be nervous." Clara nodded, sipping the terrible coffee. "What time do you think he'll arrive?" "Harrison's always punctual. He said noon. It'll be noon, maybe earlier if the roads were good." Elias glanced at the window. "We have a couple hours. I thought maybe we should go over things one more time. Make sure our story matches." They sat at the table, rehearsing their lies like actors before a performance. How long had they known each other? A few months. They'd met when Elias came through town for supplies. How had the courtship gone? Quick, practical, both of them knowing what they needed. When had Clara moved to the cabin? 3 weeks ago, right after they married. What were her duties? Cooking, cleaning, helping with the children? Did they share a bed? No, they had an understanding. They were taking things slow, but they were committed to making the marriage work. The lies felt sour in Clara's mouth, but she repeated them until they sounded natural, until she could say them without hesitation. "What about the children?" she asked. "What if Harrison asks them something we haven't prepared for?" "Then they tell the truth as much as possible. Kids are bad liars when they're trying too hard. But if he asks whether you take care of them, whether you live here, whether this is a real household, those answers have to be yes." A small sound made them both turn. Eliza was awake, sitting up on her pallet, watching them with those unnervingly steady eyes. "Morning, Eliza," Elias said gently. "You sleep okay?" She nodded slowly, still watching Clara. "We need to talk to you and Noah," Elias continued. "About today. About Mr. Harrison's visit. Where's your brother?" "Here." Noah emerged from behind a stack of supplies near the corner, and Clara realized he must have been awake for a while listening. His face was closed off, defensive. "What about the visit?" Elias explained again what Harrison would ask, what they needed to say. Noah listened with growing resentment, his jaw getting tighter with each instruction. "So we just lie," he said when Elias finished. "Pretend everything's normal when it's not." "We do what we have to do to stay together," Elias corrected. "That's not the same as lying." "Sounds the same to me." "Well, it's not. Lying would be saying Clara's someone she's not, or that we're happy when we're miserable, or that your parents didn't matter. We're not doing that. We're just not telling him things that aren't his business." Noah looked at Clara with something that might have been challenge. "And what if I tell him the truth? That you just met her 2 days ago? That this whole thing is fake?" The room went cold. Elias's face hardened. "Then they take you and your sister to Cheyenne, put you in an institution, probably separate you because they separate boys and girls, and you'll spend the rest of your childhood wondering why you chose spite over safety. Maybe I'd rather that than living a lie." "Then you're a fool." Elias's voice was harsh now, the patience stripped away. "Because Eliza doesn't get to choose. You'd be choosing for her. You'd be the one deciding she loses her only family because you wanted to make a point." Noah flinched like he'd been slapped. He looked at his sister, who was watching the argument with wide, frightened eyes, and something in him crumpled. "That's not fair," he whispered. "None of this is fair. But it's what we have." Elias's voice softened slightly. "I know you're angry, Noah. You have every right to be. But don't punish your sister because you're angry at the world." The boy stood there, shaking with suppressed emotion. Then he turned and walked to the door. "Where are you going?" Elias called after him. "Outside. I need air." The door slammed. Through the window, Clara watched him stalk toward the tree line, his small frame rigid with anger and fear. Elias rubbed his face, exhausted. "That went well." "He's terrified," Clara said quietly. "He's lashing out because he's terrified." "I know, but we don't have time for him to work through it. Harrison will be here in less than 2 hours." Clara looked at Eliza, still sitting on her pallet, clutching her piece of fabric. The little girl's eyes were shiny with unshed tears. "Can I try something?" Clara asked Elias. He gestured helplessly. "Can't make things worse." Clara knelt down next to Eliza's pallet,
making herself small and unthreatening. Eliza, I know this is scary. All of it. Mr. Harrison coming. Having to say things that don't feel quite right. Having strangers in your house telling you what to do. Eliza stared at her, unblinking. But here's what I need you to understand, Clara continued. Your brother loves you more than anything in the world. And Elias, he's trying so hard to keep you both safe. They're doing all this because they want you to stay together. Do you want that? To stay with Noah? A tiny nod. Then when Mr. Harrison asks you questions today, you just remember that. Every answer you give, every word you say, it's not about being honest or dishonest. It's about protecting what matters. And what matters is you and Noah staying together. Can you do that? Eliza's small hand reached out and touched Clara's sleeve, just barely. Then she nodded again. Good girl. Clara stood up, her knees protesting. Now how about we get you dressed in something nice? Make you look proper for the visitor. For the first time, Eliza spoke. The blue dress. You have a blue dress? Mama made it, before. Her voice was barely a whisper. It's in the trunk. The brown one. Clara looked at Elias, who pointed to a small trunk she hadn't noticed before, tucked in the corner. She opened it carefully, and the smell of lavender and old wool rose up. Inside were clothes, a woman's clothes, carefully folded. The mother's things, Clara realized, things Elias had saved for the children. Underneath the adult clothes, she found children's items. And there, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small blue dress with careful stitching and a white collar. This one? Clara held it up. Eliza nodded, something like longing in her face. Clara helped her change, gentle with the buttons and ties. The dress fit well, if a little loose. Eliza had probably lost weight since her mother died. But it was clean and pretty and made her look like a little girl instead of a grieving shadow. You look beautiful, Clara said honestly. Mama said I looked like a bluebird. The words hung in the air, precious and painful. Clara felt her throat tighten. Your mama was right. You do. Eliza touched the collar of the dress carefully, like it might disappear. Then she looked at Clara with those two old eyes and said something that broke Clara's heart. Can you braid my hair like she did? Clara had to breathe through the wave of emotion before she could answer. I can try. I might not do it exactly the same way, but I'll do my best. She found a comb in the supplies and worked through Eliza's tangled hair as gently as she could. The little girl sat perfectly still, patient in a way that suggested this had been a ritual before, a thing she and her mother had done together. Clara's hands remembered the motion from braiding her own daughter's hair, the familiar pattern of weaving strands together, creating order from chaos. She worked slowly, carefully, and when she tied off the end with a ribbon she found in the trunk, Eliza reached up to touch it. It's not the same, the little girl said. No, Clara agreed. It's not. But is it all right anyway? Eliza considered this, then nodded. It's all right. By the time Noah came back inside, sullen and red-eyed from crying in the cold, Clara had managed to make the cabin look almost civilized. She'd swept again, organized the visible clutter, set the table with their best dishes, which weren't much, but they were clean. The stew she'd started that morning was simmering on the stove, filling the cabin with the smell of cooking food. Noah stopped when he saw Eliza in her blue dress, hair braided. Something shifted in his expression. You look nice, Liza, he said quietly. Clara did my hair. He glanced at Clara, and for just a moment the hostility in his face lessened. She did good. It wasn't much, but it was something. Elias checked the window for the 10th time in as many minutes. He'll be here soon. Everyone remember what we talked about? Yes, Clara said. Noah nodded reluctantly. Eliza just looked scared. All right then. When he gets here, let me do most of the talking at first. Clara, you just be yourself. Be natural. Harrison's smart enough to know when people are performing. And what am I supposed to be? Clara asked. Your wife who's been here 3 weeks, or a stranger you married 2 days ago? Both, neither. Elias struggled for the right words. Just be someone who belongs here. That's all he needs to see. Clara wasn't sure she could pull that off. She didn't feel like she belonged here. She felt like an actor in a play she hadn't rehearsed for, trying to convince an audience that the stage was real life. The sound of hooves and wagon wheels interrupted her spiral of anxiety. Through the window, she saw a man approaching in an official-looking buggy, pulled by a horse, that looked too well fed for this territory. "He's here," Elias said unnecessarily. They all took positions like chess pieces being arranged. Elias near the door, ready to greet the visitor. Clara at the stove, doing something domestic. The children at the table, supposedly working on lessons, slate and chalk that Elias had hurriedly set out. The knock came firm and businesslike. Elias opened the door. "Mr. Harrison, right on time." Mr. Rowan. The man who stepped inside was exactly what Clara had pictured. Middle-aged, neat, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a leather satchel that probably contained forms and regulations. He wore a suit that was impractical for the frontier, and his shoes were already dusty from the trail. "I apologize for the intrusion. I know these inspections are never pleasant." "Just doing your job. Come in, please." Harrison stepped inside, his eyes immediately cataloging everything: the cabin, the children, Clara at the stove. She felt his gaze sweep over her, assessing, and she forced herself to keep stirring the stew naturally. "You must be Mrs. Rowan," Harrison said, approaching her. "I'm Samuel Harrison with the Territorial Office." Clara wiped her hands on her apron, an apron that had been Elias's mother's she'd learned this morning, and shook his hand. "Clara Rowan, pleased to meet you." "The pleasure is mine." He smiled, but it was a professional smile, giving nothing away. "I appreciate your cooperation with this process. I know it's difficult having a stranger come into your home." "It's fine. We understand you have to make sure the children are being cared for properly." "Indeed." Harrison turned to Elias. "Shall we begin?" What followed was the most stressful hour of Clara's life. Harrison sat at the table with his papers, asking questions in a conversational tone that masked their real purpose. He asked about the marriage. When? Where? Under what circumstances? Elias answered smoothly, and Clara was grateful that most of it was actually true. Yes, they'd married at the saloon. Yes, Judge Farrow had performed the ceremony. Yes, it was sudden, but both of them knew what they wanted. Then Harrison turned his attention to the household management. "Mrs. Rowan, can you tell me about your typical day here?" Clara had prepared for this, but actually saying it felt different. "I wake early, usually. Start the fire if Elias hasn't already. Make breakfast for everyone. Then it depends. Sometimes I work on mending clothes or preserving food or cleaning. I help the children with their lessons when they're ready to learn." "And the children, do they respond well to your instruction?" It was a trap question. If she said yes too enthusiastically, it would seem fake. If she said no, it would suggest she couldn't manage them. "They're still adjusting," Clara said carefully. "They've been through a tremendous loss. Some days are better than others, but we're working on it together." Harrison nodded, making a note. "I see. And Mr. Rowan, how would you characterize your wife's relationship with the children?" Elias didn't hesitate. "She's patient with them, more patient than I am, honestly. She understands what they need in a way I'm still learning." "Specific examples?" "Well," Elias gestured to Eliza. "This morning Clara helped Eliza get dressed, did her hair. That's not something I would have thought to do, but it mattered to Eliza. Those small things. Clara sees them." It was true, which made it convincing. Harrison looked at Eliza. "Is that right, young lady? Did Mrs. Rowan help you this morning?" Eliza nodded, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. "And do you like having her here?" The little girl's eyes widened. This was the question they'd feared, the one that demanded an emotional truth, not just a factual one. "She braids good," Eliza whispered. Harrison smiled slightly, a real smile this time. "High praise indeed." He turned to Noah. "And you, young man, how do you feel about the new arrangements?" Noah's jaw tightened. Claire could see him fighting with himself, torn between honesty and necessity. The silence stretched too long. Then he said, "It's different, but it's better than being sent away." "That's not what I asked. It's the answer I have." Harrison studied Noah for a long moment. "You're very direct. I appreciate that. Tell me, do you feel safe here?" "Yes." "Do you have enough to eat?" "Yes." "Are you being educated, learning what you need to know?" "Elias teaches me things about trapping and hunting and how to survive." "Clara—" He stopped, corrected himself. "Mrs. Rowan. She's teaching me to read better. She found books in her things." This was news to Clara, but she kept her expression neutral. It was a good lie, believable and practical. "I see.
Harrison made more notes. Then he stood. I'd like to see the sleeping arrangements, if you don't mind. Clara's stomach dropped. This was the moment of truth. If their story fell apart, it would be here. Elias led him to the small bedroom where Clara slept. Harrison looked around, taking in the narrow bed, the trunk. Clara's few belongings hung on pegs. This is your room, Mrs. Rowan? Yes. And Mr. Rowan sleeps? In the main room, Elias said, near the stove. The children have the corner area. That's an unusual arrangement for a married couple. Clara forced herself to meet Harrison's eyes. We're taking things at our own pace. The marriage was quick. We both acknowledge that. We're committed to making it work, but we're also being realistic about the adjustment period. I see. Harrison's expression was unreadable. And the children, do they understand this arrangement? They understand that we're all learning to live together, Clara said. That's all they need to understand right now. Harrison walked back to the main room, studying the space where Elias supposedly slept. There was a bedroll visible near the stove, supplies arranged to suggest someone actually slept there. Elias had set it up this morning, making it look lived in. Mr. Rowan, may I speak with you privately for a moment? Harrison asked. Of course. Elias followed him outside, leaving Clara alone with the children. The moment the door closed, Noah turned to her. What's he asking him? I don't know. What if he doesn't believe us? Then we deal with it. Clara kept her voice steady, even though her heart was racing. But worrying won't help. Through the window, she could see the two men talking, Harrison asking questions, Elias responding. The conversation seemed to go on forever. Eliza slipped off her chair and came to stand next to Clara, close enough that their arms touched. It was the first time she'd voluntarily sought Clara's proximity. Clara wanted to put her arm around the little girl, but she didn't. Just let her stand there, taking comfort in nearness. Finally, the men came back inside. Elias's face was carefully neutral. Clara couldn't read whether the conversation had gone well or badly. Harrison went back to his satchel, pulled out more papers. I need both of you to sign these documents. They confirm that I've conducted the inspection, that the household meets territorial standards for the care of orphaned children, and that I'm recommending the children remain in your custody. Clara's knees almost gave out with relief. She looked at Elias, saw the same relief flicker across his face before he controlled it. That's it? Elias asked. We're approved? With one condition. Harrison's voice was firm. I'll be conducting follow-up visits, quarterly, at minimum, more often if circumstances warrant. The territorial office wants to ensure the children continue to thrive. If at any point I believe the arrangement is not in their best interest, I have the authority to remove them. Do you understand? Yes, Elias said. Mrs. Rowan? I understand, Clara said. Good. Harrison held out the papers. Sign here and here. They signed. Clara's hand shook slightly, making her signature messier than usual, but Harrison didn't comment. He countersigned, dated everything, then tucked the papers back into his satchel. The children are fortunate, he said, and this time there was genuine warmth in his voice. Not every orphaned child finds themselves in a household where people are willing to go to such lengths to keep them safe. He looked at Noah and Eliza. You two should know what your guardians have done for you, the effort they've made. That's not common. I've seen many cases where adults would have chosen the easier path. Be grateful you have people who chose the harder one. Noah nodded stiffly. Eliza just stared. Harrison moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Mrs. Rowan. A word of advice from someone who's been doing this work for 20 years. Yes? Don't try too hard. The children don't need you to replace what they lost. They just need you to be present for what comes next. There's a difference. Clara felt those words hit deeper than anything else he'd said all day. Thank you. I'll remember that. After Harrison left, the cabin fell into stunned silence. Nobody moved for a long moment, like they were all afraid that moving would somehow undo what had just happened. Then Elias let out a long breath. We did it. We lied, Noah said flatly. We all lied. We protected you, Elias corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Clara watched the boys struggle with it, the relief that they weren't being separated warring with the guilt of deception. She understood that conflict better than he knew. Yes, she said quietly. There is. Because lies that hurt people are different from lies that protect them. And what we did today, that protected you and Eliza.
That's all that matters. Noah looked at her, really looked at her, for maybe the first time since she'd arrived. You think that makes it okay?
I think it makes it necessary. Okay or not okay. Doesn't matter when the alternative is losing everything. He thought about this, his young face too serious for his age. Then he turned to his sister. Come on, Liza, let's go outside for a while. They left together, the door closing softly behind them. Clara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. That was close, she said. Too close. Elias was staring at the door where Harrison had left. He knows something's not right. He's too smart not to, but he's giving us a chance. Why would he do that? Because he's seen what happens to kids in those institutions. He knows this, messy as it is better than that. Elias rubbed his face. But he'll be watching. Every quarterly visit, he'll be looking for proof that this is real. Then we make it real. Elias looked at her. How do we do that? I don't know yet, but we have 3 months until his next visit. That's 3 months to figure out how to make this feel less like a performance and more like an actual household. And if we can't? Clara thought about Eliza asking her to braid her hair, about Noah's grudging acknowledgement that she was teaching him to read, about the way the cabin had felt this morning, all of them working toward the same goal, even if they didn't trust each other yet. We will, she said, because we don't have a choice. The rest of the day passed in a strange fog of relief and exhaustion. The tension that had been coiled tight in all of them slowly unwound, leaving everyone drained. Clara made dinner, a simple meal of the stew that had been simmering all day, and they ate in relative silence. But it was a different kind of silence than before. Not hostile or defensive, just tired. After dinner, Noah did something unexpected. He brought his slate to the table where Clara was washing dishes and sat down. You said you'd teach me to read better, he said, not looking at her. Clara dried her hands. I did say that, didn't I? So will you? She sat down across from him. What are you reading now? He pulled out a tattered book from somewhere in the supplies. A reader, the kind used in schools, with simple stories and moral lessons. I can read most of it, but some of the words are hard. Show me. They worked through a passage together, Clara helping him sound out the difficult words, explaining meanings when he didn't understand. He was actually a good reader, better than he'd let on, but he struggled with comprehension, with understanding what the words meant beyond just their sounds. You're trying to read too fast, Clara said. You're so focused on getting through it that you're not stopping to think about what it's saying. Papa said reading was about getting information quick. Sometimes. But sometimes reading is about understanding, about letting the words settle in your mind until they make sense. Noah looked at her skeptically. That sounds slow. It is slow, but it works better. They practiced a bit more, and Clara could feel him starting to trust her judgment, at least in this one small thing. It wasn't much, but it was progress. When Eliza started yawning, Elias announced bedtime. The children went to their corner, and Clara heard the familiar ritual of them preparing for sleep. Noah helping Eliza change, checking under the pallet, whispering reassurances. Clara retreated to her own room, closing the door on another day in this strange new life. She sat on the hard bed and let herself feel the full weight of what they'd accomplished. They'd lied to a government official. They'd convinced him, barely, that this hastily assembled household was legitimate. They'd bought themselves 3 months. 3 months to turn a legal arrangement into something that resembled a real family. 3 months before Harrison came back and looked harder at the cracks in their story. Clara lay down, still in her dress, and stared at the ceiling. Through the wall, she heard Eliza cry out softly. Another nightmare. Noah's voice soothing her back to quiet. The sounds of Elias moving around the main room, banking the fire for the night. These were the sounds of her life now. A life she'd chosen in a moment of desperation, built on lies and necessity, and the faint hope that somehow, against all odds, it might become something real. She closed her eyes and tried to believe it was possible. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Winter was coming in earnest now. Long months of being trapped in this cabin together, unable to escape each other, forced to either figure out how to coexist or destroy each other trying. Clara had survived grief, had survived loss, had survived the long, empty months after her daughter died. Surely she could survive this. She fell asleep telling herself that lie, and for once, she almost believed it.
The weeks that followed Harrison's visit settled into something that wasn't quite routine, but wasn't chaos either. November gave way to December, and the snow came in earnest, great heavy blankets of it that transformed the mountain into a place even more isolated than before. Some mornings Clara woke to find the door frozen shut, and Elias would have to force it open with his shoulder, snow tumbling into the cabin in chunks. The isolation changed things. Not quickly, not obviously, but in small increments that only became clear when Clara looked back. There was nowhere to go, nothing to do except exist together in that small space. And in that forced proximity, the careful walls they'd all built started to develop cracks. It began with the small things. Noah stopped leaving the room every time Clara entered. Eliza started watching Clara cook, sometimes moving closer to see what she was doing. Elias began consulting Clara about decisions, what supplies they needed, how to ration the food stores, whether the children needed warmer clothes. They weren't a family, but they were becoming something. One morning in mid-December, Clara woke to find Eliza standing beside her bed. The little girl had never come into her room before, and Clara sat up quickly, alarmed. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" Eliza shook her head. She was holding something, a small wooden figure, roughly carved. "Noah made this. For you." Clara took it carefully. It was a bird, she realized, crude but recognizable, with wings spread like it was about to take flight. The wood was smooth where Noah had sanded it, rough where he'd given up on the details. "It's beautiful," Clara said honestly. "Why did he make it for me?" "Because you're teaching him words. He said that's a fair trade." Clara felt something warm expand in her chest. "Tell him thank you, and tell him it's more than a fair trade." Eliza nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "Can you braid my hair again today?" "Of course." It became a morning ritual after that. Eliza would come to Clara's room just after waking, and Clara would braid her hair while the little girl sat perfectly still, patient as stone. Sometimes Eliza talked. Small things, fragments of memories about her mother, questions about Clara's life before. Sometimes they sat in silence, the only sound the scrape of the comb through tangles. On the third morning of this ritual, Eliza asked, "Did you have a little girl?" Clara's hand stilled. "Yes. Her name was Elizabeth." "Where is she now?" The question was innocent, direct in the way children's questions are. Clara could have deflected, could have changed the subject. Instead, she told the truth. "She died when she was 3 years old." Eliza absorbed this. "Was she sick?" "Yes." "Did it hurt?" "I don't know. I hope not." Clara started braiding again, her hands moving automatically. "She was very brave, though, even when she was scared." "Mama was brave too," Eliza said quietly. "When the wagon was falling in the water, she told us to hold on to each other no matter what. That was the last thing she said." Clara's throat tightened. "That sounds like something a good mother would say." "Do you miss Elizabeth?" "Every day." "Does it get better?" "Noah says it gets better, but I don't think he believes it." Clara thought about how to answer that. She could lie, could offer the platitudes people had given her, time heals all wounds, the pain fades, you'll learn to live with it. But Eliza deserved better than platitudes. "It gets different," she said finally. "The missing doesn't go away, but you learn to carry it. Some days it's heavy, some days it's not. But it's always there, and that's all right. Missing people we love means they mattered." Eliza nodded slowly, processing this. "I'm glad you're here," she said, so quietly Clara almost missed it. "I'm glad I'm here too." The girl slipped off the chair and went back to the main room, leaving Clara sitting there with tears she hadn't expected running down her face. Not tears of grief exactly, something else. Something that felt like the beginning of healing, though she wasn't sure whose healing it was. Hers or Eliza's. Maybe both. By January, the household had found its rhythm. Elias hunted and trapped, keeping them in meat and furs. Clara managed the indoor work, cooking, mending, rationing supplies. The children helped where they could. Noah was getting good with the snares, and Eliza had taken over feeding the chickens that Elias kept in a small coop built against the cabin's south wall. They ate meals together now, without the oppressive silence of those first weeks. Conversations happened, halting and awkward sometimes, but real. Noah would tell them about what he'd seen on the trap line. Eliza would report on the chickens, giving each one a name and a personality that existed mostly in her imagination. Elias would share his plans for the spring planting, and Clara would add her thoughts, suggestions from the gardening she'd done back east. It almost felt normal. Then February came, and with it, trouble. Elias had gone into town for supplies, a trip that should have taken a day and a half at most. But 3 days passed with no sign of him. Clara tried not to worry, tried to tell herself he'd just gotten delayed by weather or difficult trails. But by the 4th day, even Noah was pacing nervously. "He should be back," the boy said for the 10th time. "He's never gone this long." "Maybe the snow's worse in the lower elevations," Clara said, trying to sound confident. "Or maybe he had trouble getting supplies. There could be 100 reasons. Or something happened to him." Clara had been trying not to think about that possibility, but now that Noah had said it out loud, she couldn't ignore it. Elias alone on the mountain trails, injured or sick or worse, and the 3 of them trapped here, unable to help, unable to even know what was wrong. "We'll give him 1 more day," she decided. "If he's not back by tomorrow night, we'll figure out what to do." "What can we do? We can't leave Eliza here alone, and we can't take her down the mountain in this weather." Noah was right, and they both knew it. They were trapped by circumstance, by winter, by their own limitations. All they could do was wait and hope. That night, the temperature dropped brutally. Clara woke to frost on the inside of the windows and her breath fogging in the air. The fire in the stove had died down to embers, and when she tried to build it back up, she realized they were running low on wood. She found Noah already awake, staring at the dwindling woodpile with worry. "Elias always keeps this stocked," he said. "He must have known he'd be gone longer than usual. How much do we have left? Maybe 2 days if we're careful, 3 if we freeze." Clara made a decision. "Then we need to get more wood." "From where?" "The stack outside is buried under 4 feet of snow, and I don't know where Elias keeps the saw." "I'll find it. You stay here with Eliza. Keep the fire going as long as you can." "You can't go out in this alone." "I can and I will. I've been watching where Elias goes. I know where the woodpile is." She started pulling on layers. Elias's coat over her dress, his boots stuffed with rags to make them fit. "I'll be back before dark." Noah looked like he wanted to argue more, but something in Clara's face stopped him. "Be careful," he said instead. The cold outside was shocking, a physical force that stole her breath and made her eyes water. Clara had to dig through snow just to find the path, and by the time she reached the woodpile, her hands were numb despite the gloves. She found the saw where she'd hoped it would be, hanging under a tarp near the chopping block. The wood itself was frozen solid, coated in ice. Every cut was a struggle, the saw binding and sticking. Her shoulders burned, her hands cramped. But she kept working, driven by the knowledge that the children were depending on her. She'd managed to cut and stack a decent pile when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not an animal. The creak and jingle of a wagon. Elias appeared through the trees, driving the wagon slower than usual, hunched over the reins. Clara dropped the saw and ran toward him, slipping in the snow. "Where have you been?" The words came out harsh with relief. Noah thought, got caught in a storm on the way back," Elias said, his voice rough and strained. "Had to wait it out in a line shack for 2 days. I'm sorry. I should have planned better." He started to climb down from the wagon, and Clara saw him wince. "You're hurt." "It's nothing. Just twisted my ankle getting the wagon unstuck. It'll heal." But when he tried to put weight on it, his leg buckled. Clara caught him before he fell, took as much of his weight as she could manage. "That's not nothing. Come on, let's get you inside." Between the 2 of them, they made it to the cabin. Noah's eyes went wide when he saw them. "What happened?" "He's hurt. Help me get him to a chair." They settled Elias near the stove, and Clara knelt to examine his ankle. Even through his boot, she could feel the swelling. When she tried to remove the boot, he hissed in pain. "This needs to come off. It's going to hurt." "Just do it." She worked the boot off as gently as she could, but there was no gentle way. By the time it was off, Elias's face was gray and he was gripping the chair arms hard enough to turn his knuckles white. The ankle was badly swollen, already bruising purple and black. Clara had seen enough injuries on the farm to know it probably wasn't broken, but it was a serious sprain. He wouldn't be walking on it for weeks. "Noah, get me some snow in a bowl. Clean snow from the top. Eliza, I need cloths. Anything clean we can use for wrapping." Clara looked at Elias. "You're going to have to stay off this completely. No walking, no weight on it at all." I can't do that. There's work. The work can wait, or I'll do it. You're no good to anyone if you damage this permanently. Elias looked like he wanted to argue, but the pain was winning. Fine. For a few days. For as long as it takes, Clara corrected. She spent the rest of the day caring for him, ice to bring down the swelling, then wrapping it tight to stabilize it. She made a poultice from herbs she found in Elias's supplies, herbs she didn't really know how to use, but that seemed like they were meant for this. She elevated his leg, made him drink water even though he insisted he was fine. By evening, he was running a fever, his body's response to the injury and the exposure. Clara sat beside him through the night, changing the cool cloths on his forehead, making sure the fever didn't get worse. Noah and Eliza watched all this with wide eyes. This was their protector, their guardian, laid low and vulnerable. And Clara, the stranger they still weren't sure they trusted, was the one keeping him alive. Is he going to die? Eliza whispered at one point. No, Clara said firmly. He's going to be fine. He's just hurt and tired. His body needs time to heal. But what if? No, what ifs? He's going to be fine. She said it with a certainty she didn't entirely feel, but the children needed that certainty, and somehow saying it made it feel more true. The fever broke around dawn. Elias woke confused and thirsty, but lucid. Clara helped him drink water, checked his ankle. The swelling had gone down slightly. You stayed up all night, he said, his voice rough. Someone had to. Thank you. It was the first time he'd thanked her for anything other than marrying him. The words were simple, but they felt significant. For the next 2 weeks, Clara ran the household alone. She chopped wood, hauled water, cooked meals, tended the animals, and managed the children. Elias tried to help from his chair, directing and advising, but mostly he had to watch while Clara struggled through tasks he could have done in half the time. It was the hardest physical work Clara had ever done. Her hands blistered and bled, her back ached constantly. She fell into bed each night so exhausted she couldn't even think. But she didn't complain, and she didn't fail. Noah started helping more without being asked, checking the snares, feeding the chickens, keeping the fire going. Eliza appointed herself Elias's nurse, bringing him water and keeping him company so he wouldn't feel useless. And slowly, something shifted. They stopped being strangers sharing space and started being people who needed each other. One night, after the children were asleep, Elias spoke from his chair near the fire. I was wrong about you. Clara looked up from the mending she was working on. Wrong how? I thought you'd be, I don't know, someone who needed taking care of, someone I'd have to protect along with the children. He shifted, trying to get comfortable. But you're stronger than I am, in all the ways that matter. That's not true. It is. I can hunt and build things and survive in the wilderness. But you kept us all alive when I couldn't. You kept us together. He paused. I don't think I've thanked you properly for that. You don't need to thank me. This is my home now, too. The word slipped out before Clara realized she'd said it. Home. Not the cabin, not the arrangement, not the legal necessity. Home. Elias heard it too. Something passed between them in the firelight. Recognition, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. Yeah, he said quietly. It is. By March, Elias was walking again, though he still limped on the bad ankle. The injury had changed something in him, made him less solitary, more willing to ask for help, and Clara had proven she could give that help when it mattered. The children had changed too. Noah no longer bristled when Clara gave him instructions. Eliza sought her out for comfort when nightmares woke her, not just Noah. They were starting to feel like a unit, moving together instead of orbiting each other warily. When Harrison came for his quarterly visit in mid-March, the change was obvious. He noticed it immediately. The way the children gravitated toward Clara naturally, the way she and Elias moved around each other in the kitchen without awkwardness, the way conversations flowed instead of stuttering. Well, Harrison said after his inspection, I have to say, this is remarkable progress. When I left in November, I wasn't sure this arrangement would last the winter. We weren't either, Elias admitted, but we figured it out. Indeed you did. Harrison looked at Clara. The children seem genuinely attached to you, Mrs. Rowan. That's not something that can be faked. They're good children, Clara said. They just needed time. And patience. And dedication. Harrison closed his notebook. I'm recommending this placement continue without additional monitoring beyond the standard yearly visits. You've more than demonstrated your capability. After he left, Noah turned to Clara with an expression she'd never seen on his face before, something that looked like relief mixed with gratitude. We get to stay, he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. You get to stay, Clara confirmed. He didn't hug her. That would have been too much, too fast. But he looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded. An acknowledgement, an acceptance. The spring came slowly, reluctantly, as it always did in the mountains. But it came. The snow melted in patches, revealing the brown earth underneath. Eliza's garden beds emerged from the white, and Clara spent days preparing them for planting, working soil that had been frozen for months. Noah helped her, following her instructions about spacing and depth and timing. As they worked, he talked more than he ever had before. About his parents, about the journey west that had ended in tragedy, about his fears and hopes. I was so angry at you when you first came, he admitted one afternoon, his hands deep in the dirt. I thought you were trying to replace Mama. I know you did. But you weren't, were you? You were just trying to help. I was trying to survive too, Clara said honestly. I needed you and Eliza as much as you needed me. Maybe more. Noah thought about this. Because of Elizabeth? Because of Elizabeth. Because I needed a reason to keep going, and you two gave me one. That seems like a lot to put on kids. Clara smiled slightly. You'd be surprised what kids can carry. They planted seeds that day, beans and squash and herbs, things that would grow slowly over the summer, needing care and patience, not unlike what they'd been doing with each other. That night at dinner, Elias announced he'd been thinking about expanding the cabin, adding another room maybe, making it less crowded. We'd need to do it before next winter, he said. Get the structure up while the weather's good. We? Clara asked. Well, I can't do it alone, not with this ankle still healing wrong. He looked at Noah. You're strong enough to help now, and Clara, you've proven you can do whatever needs doing. Where would this room go? Noah asked, interested. They spent the rest of the meal discussing plans, where to put the addition, what it would be used for, how to source the lumber. It was the kind of conversation families had, planning their future together. As spring turned to summer, the cabin did grow. Elias and Noah felled trees and stripped logs. Clara learned to notch and stack them, her hands developing new calluses on top of old ones. Eliza appointed herself the supervisor, bringing water and pointing out where the logs weren't level. The new room took shape slowly, a proper bedroom that would be for Noah, giving him privacy as he got older, which meant the corner of the main room could become storage, and the whole cabin would feel less cramped. But more than the physical structure, something else was being built. Trust, maybe. Or the slow, painful process of becoming something other than strangers bound by legal necessity. One evening in late June, Clara was sitting outside on the step watching the sunset when Elias joined her. He'd taken to doing this, sitting with her in the quiet hours, not talking much, just sharing space. I've been thinking, he said after a while. About? About what this is. This arrangement, this... He gestured vaguely at the cabin, the children inside, the life they'd built. Clara waited, unsure where he was going. When I asked you to marry me, it was purely practical, legal necessity. I didn't think... He stopped, frustrated with his own inability to articulate. I didn't think it would become real. Real how? Like a real marriage, like a real family. I thought we'd just be people sharing space, raising kids together out of obligation. He looked at her. But that's not what this is anymore, at least not for me. Clara's heart beat faster. What is it then? I don't know exactly, but I know I look forward to these evenings, sitting here with you. I know I miss you when you're not around. I know that when I think about the future, you're in it, not as a legal necessity, but as a partner, a real one. He said it awkwardly, like a man unused to expressing feelings. But the honesty in it made it beautiful. I feel that too, Clara said quietly. I didn't expect to. I thought I was done with this, with caring about someone, with building something with another person. But here we are. Here we are, Elias agreed. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then, carefully, like testing uncertain ground, Elias reached over and took Clara's hand. She let him, her fingers intertwining with his. It was the first time they'd touched beyond necessity, beyond the practical contact of daily life.
It felt right. Inside the cabin, they could hear the children, Noah reading to Eliza from one of Clara's books, their voices mixing together in the lamplight, the sound of a home that was becoming real through sheer stubborn determination. Summer moved into fall. The harvest from the garden was modest but real, vegetables they'd grown themselves, proof that life could be cultivated even in this harsh place. They preserved what they could, knowing winter would come again. Noah turned 9 in September. They celebrated with a cake Clara made from precious hoarded sugar and the eggs from Eliza's chickens. It wasn't much, but Noah's face when he saw it, that combination of surprise and pleasure, made every bit of effort worth it. "I didn't think anyone remembered," he said quietly. "We remembered," Elias said. "We'll always remember." It was a promise, the kind Elias had learned to keep. In October, as the leaves turned and the air grew cold again, something happened that changed everything. They were all sitting around the dinner table, their nightly ritual now, the one time when everyone came together, when Eliza looked at Clara and asked a question. "Can I call you Mama?" The cabin went silent. Noah stopped eating mid-bite. Elias's eyes went wide. Clara felt her breath catch. "Eliza, you don't have to," she started. "I know I don't have to, but can I? If I want to?"
Clara looked at the little girl, no longer quite so little, grown sturdy and bright over the months. She thought about that first night, when Eliza had stared at her with distrust and fear, about the slow process of braiding hair and sharing stories and learning to trust. "Yes," Clara said, her voice thick. "Yes, you can call me that." Eliza nodded, satisfied. Then she went back to eating like she hadn't just fundamentally shifted the nature of their relationship. Noah was watching Clara carefully. "I'm not ready for that yet. To call you Mama. It feels—" "I know," Clara interrupted gently. "You don't have to. Not until you're ready. Maybe not ever. That's all right." He nodded, relieved. "But I don't mind if Eliza does." "Neither do I." That night, when Clara tucked Eliza into bed, another ritual that had developed over the months, the little girl wrapped her arms around Clara's neck and whispered, "Good night, Mama." Clara had to close her eyes against the wave of emotion. It wasn't replacing Elizabeth. Nothing could do that. But it was making room for new love alongside the old grief. It was choosing to live instead of just existing. "Good night, sweetheart," she whispered back. When the first snow fell in November, exactly a year after Clara had arrived, they were ready for it. The woodpile was stocked, the food stores full, the cabin expanded and reinforced. They'd learned from the previous winter, had prepared better this time. But more than that, they were different people than they'd been a year ago, stronger, more connected, more like a family. On the anniversary of that night in the saloon, Elias brought it up over dinner. "It's been a year," he said, "since we got married, since all this started." Noah looked between them. "Are you going to celebrate? People celebrate anniversaries." "I don't know," Claire said. "It doesn't really feel like something to celebrate, more like something to survive." "We did more than survive," Elias said. "We built something. That seems worth marking." They didn't have champagne or fancy food or any of the traditional anniversary trappings. What they had was a meal cooked together, eaten around a table that was too small but felt exactly right. They had children who'd learned to smile again. They had a cabin that had become a home. After the children went to bed, Clara and Elias sat by the fire. They'd moved Clara's things into Elias's room a month ago. A quiet shift that nobody had commented on, but everyone had noticed. They still moved carefully around each other, still learning how to be married for real instead of just on paper. But they were learning. "Do you regret it?" Elias asked. Saying yes that night? Clara thought about it honestly, about the fear and uncertainty, about the hard work and harder moments, about learning to love children who weren't hers, to trust a man she barely knew, to build a life from nothing but desperation and hope. "No," she said. "I don't regret it." Even though it was insane, even though you had every reason to say no, especially because of that, because the safe choice would have been staying in that boarding house room, staying small and scared and half alive. She looked at him. "You gave me a reason to be fully alive again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard." Elias took her hand, a gesture that had become natural now.
I asked you to marry me to save those children. But I think maybe you saved all of us, including me." "We saved each other," Clara corrected. "That's what family does." The years that followed weren't easy. Nothing about frontier life was easy. There were hard winters and failed crops and illnesses that scared them. There were arguments and misunderstandings and moments when the old wounds reopened. But there were also graduations from childhood to adolescence. There was Noah, bringing home his first deer, pride shining in his face. There was Eliza learning to read and write and argue with the ferocity of someone who'd found her voice. There was the cabin expanding again, and then again, growing to accommodate their growing life. When Noah turned 16, he announced he wanted to apprentice with a carpenter in Aspen Bend. It meant leaving the mountain, living in town for months at a time. Claire's first instinct was to say no, to keep him safe and close. But Elias reminded her that keeping children safe sometimes meant letting them go. "He needs to find his own path," Elias said. "We gave him the foundation. Now we have to trust it's strong enough." So Noah left, and the cabin felt emptier. But he came home for visits, bringing stories of the town and the work he was learning. And eventually he brought home a girl, a quiet, practical young woman who reminded Clara of herself at that age. Eliza grew into a young woman who knew her own mind and spoke it freely. She took over the garden, expanding it beyond anything Clara had imagined, selling surplus vegetables in town. She had her mother's courage and her father's stubbornness, and she used both to carve out a life that was entirely her own. When Harrison came for what would be his final visit, the children were old enough now that territorial oversight was no longer required. He sat with Clara and Elias and shook his head in wonder. "I've been doing this work for 30 years, he said. "I've seen a lot of arrangements, a lot of households, but I've never seen anything quite like what you built here. You took an impossible situation and made it work through sheer determination." "And love," Clara added. "Eventually." "Yes, that too." Harrison gathered his papers. For what it's worth, I knew that first day that something wasn't quite right. The story was too perfect, too rehearsed, but I also saw something else. I saw people who were willing to fight for those children, and that mattered more than whether the paperwork was technically accurate. After he left, Elias turned to Clara. He knew. All along he knew we were lying. And he let us anyway, because sometimes the rules matter less than the outcome. They stood on the porch of their cabin, larger now, sturdy, a real home, and looked out at the life they'd built. It hadn't been the life either of them had planned. It hadn't been easy or simple or anything like what they'd imagined, but it had been real. And it had been worth it. Years later, when Clara was older and her hair had gone silver, when Elias's limp was more pronounced and the winters felt colder, they would sit on that same porch and watch their grandchildren play in the yard. Noah's children and Eliza's children, running and laughing and filling the mountain with noise. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, Clara would think back to that night in the saloon, to standing up when everyone else stayed seated, to saying yes to something impossible. She'd learned something important in the years since that night, something she wished she could go back and tell her younger self. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to show up, not to fix everything, not to have all the answers, but just to be present, to try. Elias had asked her once, during one of those quiet evening conversations, if she believed in fate. "No," she'd said. "I believe in choices. I believe that we choose, every day, who we want to be and what we want to build. Fate didn't bring me to that cabin. Choice did." "And if you had it to do over? If you could go back to that night, knowing everything that would come after, would you still say yes?" Clara had smiled. "I'd say yes faster, because that's what she'd learned in this impossible, beautiful, difficult life they'd built together. That love, real love, the kind that lasts, isn't about perfection. It's not about smooth beginnings or easy journeys. It's about choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. It's about building something real out of broken pieces. It's about being kind even when you're scared, especially when you're scared." One winter evening, many years after that first desperate night, the family gathered around the dinner table. Noah and his wife, Eliza, and her husband, children of various ages squeezed in wherever they'd fit. The cabin that had once barely held 4 people now burst at the seams with the family that had grown from that impossible beginning. Before they ate, Noah stood up. He'd grown into a man who looked like his father, but had Elias's quiet strength and Clara's determination. "I want to say something," he said, and the table quieted. When I was 8 years old, I lost everything. My parents, my home, any sense of safety or future. I was angry and scared, and I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again. He looked at Elias and Clara. Then Elias took us in when he had every reason not to. And Clara, his voice caught. Clara showed up when no one else would. She stayed when it was hard. She taught me that family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's showing up every day and choosing to try. He raised his glass. So here's to the people who choose to stay, to the ones who build families out of fragments, to my parents, all of them. The table erupted in agreement, glasses raised, voices mixing together. Clara felt Elias's hand find hers under the table, their fingers intertwining the way they had that first time on the porch, when they'd both been testing uncertain ground. "We did all right," he murmured. "We did better than all right," Clara corrected. That night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Clara stood on the porch one last time, looking out at the mountains that had been her home for so many years. She thought about the woman she'd been, broken and lost and desperate for meaning. She thought about the impossible choice she'd made in a crowded saloon, the way one moment of courage had redirected her entire life. She thought about Elizabeth, buried so far away. And she thought about Eliza, sleeping safely inside, who taught her that loving again didn't mean betraying the past. The mountains were quiet, patient as they'd always been, waiting for spring, for summer, for all the seasons that would come and go, waiting for the people who chose to make their lives here to prove they were strong enough. Clara had proven it. They all had. She went back inside, to the warmth and the life they'd built, and closed the door on another day in this impossible, precious existence. And if someone had asked her, in that moment, what the secret was, how they'd taken something built on lies and necessity and turned it into something true, she would have said this: try. Just try. Even when you don't know how, even when you're sure you'll fail, even when everything in you says it's impossible, try to be kind. Try to show up. Try to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair. Because sometimes that trying is enough. Sometimes it's more than enough. Sometimes it's everything.